All right, listen up, people. Nothing can derail a podcast faster than dry mouth.
It's real, and honestly, it's dangerous. Thankfully, our friends over at Flint's Mints have got us covered, and they will get you covered too.
Not only do their mints come in a staggering amount of delicious flavors, but each flavor provides a different level of salivary satisfaction.
What Chris is talking about is their F-strength effect. From the lowest level of 100 all the way up to 300, the higher you go, the wetter your mouth gets.
Oh, baby. Listen, I like to use these things while I'm working out. It's really kind of irritating when you have to keep reaching for the water every time you get a little bit of dry mouth, especially if you're on the bike or something. Flint's Mints has got me covered. I pop in one every time my mouth gets a little bit dry and I'm set for my workout. Also, sugar-free, and they're also good for your teeth.
Recently, we just went on a hike to the falls, and like the preparer that I am, I forgot a water bottle. Didn't forget the pen, though. On the way to the falls, I realized that my mouth was just dry as could be. Luckily, in my pocket, I had this sweet tin of Flint's Mints, and after I popped one, gave it a couple minutes, my mouth is wetter than those falls.
Now, enough about us. Where can you get this? You got to go to flints.com. That's FLINTTS.com.
Use code historically high for 15% off through November 30th on any mints at Flint's.
Again, that's flints.com, Flints with 2 T's. Use code historically high. Get yourself 15% off.
Cottonmouth kills. Flint saves.
Welcome back, everybody. Class is in session. Take out your Benjamins, your papers, roll it up. You know what to do. Today's topic is something that occurred when I was 10 years old. How old were you when this happened?
Would have been 6.
And, you know, you're aware of stuff that happens
for sure.
around that time, but until, you know, you really dig into it like we do for these topics, you really have no idea what went into here. I mean, you hear the term domestic terrorism. For a while there, I always mixed up Timothy McVeigh and Ted Kaczynski.
Both bombers.
But yeah, the Oklahoma City bombing there's so much that we know about it leading up to it that, I mean, we've talked about this at length this week, but we usually do topics that we can leave at the end of the topic and know that that portion of history, or if we cover something shitty, that's over. This is something that makes me feel like we're still within the same social situation, societal situation that led to this. And that just kind of makes it depressing.
Well, and if anything, more wannabe Timothy McVeighs can connect with more other wannabe Timothy McVeighs via the internet.
Yep.
So you kind of start to get this mentality where, are they feeding off of each other? Are they egging each other on? And I mean, this topic is sort of a bummer, but at the same time, it's so important to know kind of like the outcome that what we see in rhetoric that's talked about today, the rhetoric of today, like what it could produce. So we maybe can take a step back and be like, oh shit, maybe we don't want to push extreme views this far because this is what can happen out of those things. There's a lot of people that are more willing to say some crazy stuff on the internet, but knowing that
they're keeping it low stakes.
Yeah.
Because there's freedom of speech. They can say that, but until those words are put into action, it's not illegal.
Well, and then once the words are put into action, there has to be a spin zone as to, oh, well, this was a false flag, instead of just thinking to yourself, no, I was probably responsible for that, partially responsible. I helped him push him over the edge to go do something crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And this allows us to even kind of dip back into previous episode for Waco and kind of found in a weird way how the situation in Waco with the Branch Davidians and everything, how that was seen by certain individuals that were already kind of going down a certain path. And it's so crazy to think, because, I mean, we did talk about this during the Branch Davidian one, but there was an acknowledgement throughout the majority of the public that it, you know, the government had kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's a pretty common consensus. At the same time, it's easy to view it through that lens of what we know now. But being there on the ground when that happens, when all that stuff is going down, you're making split decisions and everything. Yeah, wrong decisions are going to be made. I'm not making an excuse for it. But what I'm saying is that if you are already of a certain mindset, you can make anything make sense to you. You can make anybody out to be the bad guy. You can justify anything you need to do. And this is exactly what this story is someone believing in a very specific thing despite multitudes of evidence to the contrary. And what happens when someone steps over that point of just talk.
Well, this is going to kind of be a little bit more of a difficult episode for us. Because I don't know if it comes across that way. I don't know if maybe I'm just completely wrong about this, but we don't usually show really our political views in different things.
Yeah.
It's just more of like a think tank and a talk.
Well, we usually talk about things that had taken place so far, far back, that it's a different political climate now. Or
Yeah.
we're talking about things where it's very easy, talking about MK Ultra, talking about COINTELPRO, all that stuff. There's a very clear-cut bad guy, good guy. Of course there is in this, but this technically, while Timothy McVeigh, who was responsible, there's an end date to him. It's already happened. But what led to him being essentially, what do they call it when you become an extremist, but when like you're made into that? I can't think of the term for it.
It'll come.
But basically when this type of
Radicalized.
like rhetoric or kind of like, social issues push someone to do something like this, and you can see very clear parallels between stuff going on now, it's just like, what came of this? What came of this tragedy? And like, why are we still having this same conversation today? Why are we still having this same fight today?
Yeah, and most of it comes down to not knowing, and this is why I hesitate to want to really tie into this, but this is a situation where it's great. I think everybody should have a fairly healthy distrust of the government, but there has to come to an end of understanding where logic kind of takes over to be
Yeah.
like, okay, I don't trust him. Like in these situations, we're going to be talking about Ruby Ridge. I would rather hear the story from the victims first and kind of what they said before I go into the government, because I don't want to be biased by somebody who I believe could be lying about it.
Withholding information.
Yes.
And you would never know.
Because I'm more willing to give the victim in a situation like that the benefit of a doubt until I hear the government side or until I hear the legal side of it. And then if the legal side of it can kind of make more sense, you can kind of try to find somewhere in the
You can
middle.
bridge the gaps of the information where things are, differing accounts.
But it's the people that hear the government side of it and are immediately like, lie.
Yeah.
You're lying about this. You did it. You tried to kill these people. You screwed yourself, or you screwed us over. You're coming for me next because those people and I shared a similar belief. So if you can kill them, you're probably coming after me.
Exactly.
And once the paranoia sets in, there's really not a whole lot that you can do about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, you know what? Let's stop beating around the bush. Let's get into this. Before we do, remember, guys, rate. Oh, you know what? I didn't even... Forgot I had written down an intro. I'm not going to miss it.
The perils of smoking before an episode.
Yes, that's what it is. The man that is providing those wonderful opinions, he's the Doug to my Skeeter. He's the Corey to my Sean. He's the Kevin Arnold to my Paul Pfeiffer. That's Professor Adam. I'm Professor Chris. And this is the Oklahoma City bombing. Okay, so obviously occurs in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Date that this occurs, and we're going to be going back. I just kind of want to set the stage for the actual event itself. April 19th, 1995. This date is going to have a lot of significance, what it's basically on the anniversary of, and we're going to discuss that.
2 anniversaries.
Yes, correct. One way, way back, one much more recent. The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City was bombed, and killed 168 people, 800 plus wounded. It remains the deadliest act of domestic terror in the United States. So not like, Pearl Harbor, 9/11, all that kind of stuff. That essentially is international terrorism coming in from outside. Domestic terror's homegrown. That's what domestic terrorism is. Main perpetrators in this story, main characters we're going to talk about, Timothy McVeigh, Terry Nichols, and Michael and Lori Fortier are kind of going to be the main players. Some more than others.
And the one common trait that they all share is they all are RACISTMOUSE. Wait. Is that the Mickey Mouse thing?
MICKEYMOUSE?
Yeah, they're all very, very racist.
Yes.
And I don't know if this was just kind of more in vogue, if this has anything to do with how they grew up. We'll get into most of these guys' backstories, but that's kind of the common thread that bonds these people is distrust of the government and distrust of anybody that didn't look like them or that was Filipino.
Yes. So, to kind of go back, we're going to discuss the main architect and perpetrator of this, which is Timothy McVeigh. Timothy was born April 23rd, 1968, born in Lockport, New York, and didn't go into, I didn't want to go into a lot of his upbringing because, frankly, he could be brought up one way and end up turning out another way, and I don't want it to end up sound like we've dealt with a lot of situations where you can definitely harken back to the parents and be like, that's why this person turned out this way. This is why they were the way they were.
Yeah, for sure.
I think painting his parents in that light would kind of probably be a little bit unfair, especially based on kind of how his father tries to at least intervene in what way he felt he tried to do or was appropriate there. So just kind of moving up until when Tim starts getting outwardly a little weird.
I think that there was always a little bit of that in him. April 23rd, 1968, like you said, in Lockport, New York. I think it's outside of Buffalo. Probably a pretty small town, an area that's not super well populated.
We haven't
probably.
heard of it, yeah.
Second of three, he had two sisters. I don't know if having multiple sisters makes you a little crazier. I've never had one. I'm assuming there's a chance that
Not
it
blow
could.
up a building full of people crazy.
No. But maybe a little bit. Only being the only male besides your dad in the house didn't last long. His childhood was marked by a divorce between his parents when he was 10 years old, and he was constantly bullied. And this is coming from him. Normally, anything that Timothy McVeigh says, I would probably call bullshit on. I feel like with the detail that he goes into about being bullied in these ideations that he would have about beating up the people that were mean to him and killing and blowing them up, makes me think that that's not a lie because he's put that much thought into, like, wanting to kill these people that bullied him. It makes me think that he was definitely bullied. If you see him, definitely... not that this is a good thing. He's a bullyable person.
Yeah.
He's got qualities that you could point out that would be amusing in a mean way. He was shy. He was very reserved. Not great with girls. I don't know if that's a correlation throughout his life, and I don't really know how much else we have to talk about it. Died a virgin. There's only like one girl that was in high school that he had dated, and other than that, he just said that he could never keep a girl's attention. He was never good at making a girl interested in him, which when you hear about some of the things that he's going to talk about later in life, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, you're kind of scaring some people off with what your choice of topics probably is. In high school, he gets really into computers. He's part of like a computer club. And he starts kind of growing, through interest for his grandfather, starts kind of gaining an interest in guns and shooting.
Oh, yeah.
And that his grandfather ends up living outside of Pendleton, New York, which was the basically a little bit, I guess, more rural area, I'm guessing. And guns kind of ended up taking over his every waking moment. Now, I don't know if this comes into play, and this is kind of one of several gripes I have. I'm going to try not to go too far into it. there are people that, you have people that are outwardly just like loudly like 2A people. And that's fine. I own, I own a gun that I use for home defense and everything. But I think that there is a differentiation essentially from what is the reason that you need to own these weapons. I think there are two types of people. I think there are some people that are like, this makes me feel safe.
Yeah.
And it's to protect my family. That's what its purpose is for. I use this gun to go hunting. I grew up going hunting. I totally get that. Bolt action rifles, pump shotguns, pistols, all that shit. Fine. There are then people that seek out and become enamored with firearms because it provides them something that they've never had before in their life, which is, in their minds, a form of strength.
Yeah.
That they don't have to be strong physically to fight back. That they have this equalizer, this thing that can essentially win any argument. And those are the people that should be the least allowed to own firearms, that they need that in order to feel like being able to fight, or just because it makes them feel strong or dangerous.
That's the one reason that I don't buy an Aston Martin. Because if I got an Aston Martin, I would be the biggest douchebag.
That's the one reason?
I mean, yeah. I if I thought harder, I could probably come up with another reason. But if I had myself an Aston Martin, if I ever got in a debate or an argument or anything like that, that's going to be my drop the hammer moment and be like, oh, yeah, you're arguing with somebody that has an Aston Martin. Do you have an Aston Martin?
You're going to be trying to hit the button on your key fob to have it start and be like, what's that sound? And be like, oh, that's my car.
Yeah. Same thing with a gun. And that's why I shouldn't have an Aston Martin.
And so basically, I mean, he becomes so enamored with guns, he's even bringing guns to school. And of course, it's a different time. He's bringing guns to school to show his friends and everything like that. And also, while he is in high school, he reads a little book called the Turner Diaries. This is not like the Diary of Anne Frank or anything like that. It's actually very, very much the opposite of that. The Turner Diaries were authored by the highly recognized neo-Nazi named William Pierce.
And that's why he wrote it under a pseudonym. Andy McDonald.
Andy McDonald?
I believe so.
This book is basically a post-apocalyptic book that involves basically the government trying to create a race war or a ethnic cleansing against white people, and they end up rising up and killing all of the other, ethnicities and everything like that. Basically, it's just a love letter to being a real piece of shit, is what it is.
It's a book that starts out, and I was so tempted to read it. I'm glad that I didn't. I don't think that it's something that anybody should read, but
Take a peek into the madness.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that can probably handle it better than I could without getting angry and just reading it from an apathetic way. But it's about a pandemic that wipes out a bunch of people. Then the government starts pressing onto white people, the white nationalist wet dream. They then blow up the FBI using a truck bomb. And once they overthrow the government, they start mass genocides of Jews, Asian folks, black people, really anybody that doesn't look like them. And what, Nathaniel Turner, is that the main character in it?
I didn't get the name. I would assume so. It's something Turner if it's called the Turner Diaries.
Excuse me.
But already kind of from a young age, he's already exhibiting this. It's not I don't want to say it's a blame or anything like that, but he already has these foundational ideas of racial superiority.
Earl Turner.
Earl
sounds like that's a fitting name.
Yeah, definitely. So, racial superiority, things like that. After graduating high school, tries to go to college, ends up dropping out, I think, after a couple weeks.
Oh, we can't leave high school yet.
Okay.
We're going to talk about the Commodore 64.
Okay.
It was his first home computer console. I don't know what that means. I don't know what a Commodore 64 is. I know what the Commodores are, and I know what a Nintendo 64 is. I don't think they ever went together.
I remember hearing the term Commodore 64, like nerd shit, yeah.
He said that he used to break into government websites and virtually walk around inside of them as a character called the Wanderer. That sounds like some weird stuff to me. We probably should have checked him out if that was truly happening. Also in high school, he gets hit with, what are they, the superlatives? Gets hit with most promising computer programmer.
Like most likely to,
Yes.
something like that, yeah.
And second one was most talkative, which this is another reason how I know that he got bullied, because he was a very shy, quiet kid,
Yeah.
and the people in school thought it would be funny to vote him most talkative. So he just doesn't have, I don't know, that's not an abnormal high school life, right?
No. I mean, kids get, this is going to tie into shit nowadays and everything like that.
Yeah.
But shit, man, you just told me yesterday, about the school shooting in Georgia, and those are the kids that are mostly isolated and feel bullied and ostracized and stuff like that. I'm not making an excuse, but, maybe be fucking nice to each other and it'll increase your chances of survival. I don't know.
You won't meet Steve Buscemi.
Yeah, exactly. Is this Danny Grange, whatever, from Nib High School? One thing that, went along with his obsession for guns is boyhood dream was to own a gun store. And
Not a candy shop, not an ice cream shop,
Gun
not
store.
a sports store.
starts, reading magazines religiously, ends up getting infatuated with Soldier of Fortune. He's in it early. He's in it really, really early. And after he ends up, college doesn't end up working out, he ends up getting a job to, is it like guard armored cars? And
He got his concealed weapons permit solely so he could get this job.
yeah.
So
and,
carrying a weapon for an armored car.
and concealed weapons permit in New York, correct? Because that does come into play.
Yeah.
So he has this concealed in New York. At the age of, and he's feeling at this point as well, after reading a lot of the literature that he has, that white people, even at this point, because affirmative action at this point had become a thing, correct?
Yeah, and if not now, definitely when he gets home from the military.
Yeah. He feels essentially that there's a punishment being put onto the white race due to the fact that affirmative action is trying to promote black people and women being hired.
Minorities, yeah.
So, yeah, he's already kind of upset about that.
Which, again, the guy loves guns and computer programming. Mm-hmm. He doesn't go to college. I don't know how big of a deal college was back then, but I'm sure computer programmers were probably somebody that had to go to college to get a job. So if he's on the level of armored car driver or something like that, it may not be that there's a wealth of jobs being taken through affirmative action. It's just that he has a very niche skill set.
Yeah. If the skill set is high enough, because guess what? You could be really good at computer programming in high school, but that doesn't mean you're good at computer programming in general.
Yeah.
You could just be the best out of a very small select group of people.
Yep.
At the age of 20, he ends up enlisting in the Army, and surprise, surprise, he excelled with any gun he got his hands on. And while he was training at Fort Benning in Georgia, he ends up meeting this guy named Terry Nichols. Enter the second character of our tale here.
And Terry didn't kill anybody in Oklahoma City directly, but I think he may have killed before. Terry was an interesting guy. I believe they grew up in Michigan. He had a wife and a couple children prior to going into the military, I believe. He ends up getting divorced from his first wife while he's enlisted. I think that sort of plays into his discharge from the military.
So he's a little bit older.
Yep.
He was the oldest guy in basic training when he went into it. And he didn't even tell his wife that he was signing up for the army, and as soon as she found out about it and he shipped off, she divorced his ass. I'm sorry, but that's a pretty big life decision that you probably need to, especially considering the fact that you're going to be gone and not even there for an extended period of time, and you got 2 kids. I could see where she was a little bit pissed off about that.
It definitely seemed like more of a move towards something that he was chasing, a dream that he was chasing. They became real quick friends, sharing their love of guns and survivalism, which is something that I think some people come into nowadays at kind of an older age, unless your parents are really into it. Timothy was into it very, very young. He was a survivalist, always stashing away extra water, rations, and things like that because he believed that one day the shit was going to hit the fan. Not necessarily in a governmental way, but just in case anything happened.
Kind of a helter-skelter type vibe to this.
A little bit.
Yeah.
So that's not really the only thing that they had bonded over. They had bonded over a little bit of, maybe I would call light racism. Timmy got written up at Fort Benning for purchasing and wearing a white power shirt. And he was very angry about this because the African Americans that were in their grouping were wearing black power shirts, and he didn't understand the difference between a black power t-shirt and a white power t-shirt. Not understanding that black power hasn't ever raised its hand and dropped a super wrathful vengeance on the white power like white power did to black power.
He also bought the t-shirt from a KKK rally.
Yeah, that
was there to essentially protest the black soldiers or black soldiers being in the military.
So not good, but
not exactly like you can claim, hey, I just saw this white power t-shirt at the store and I was like, oh, hey, black power, white power. Like, yeah, same thing. No. You know, if you're buying this from a KKK rally, what the symbolism and the meaning behind that phrase is. There's no getting around it.
That wasn't on the rack between a Skinnerd shirt and an Aerosmith shirt.
Yeah.
You bought that with a purpose. After that, they go ahead and ship off to Camp Riley in Kansas, where they meet the third male player in this, Michael Fortier. Michael Fortier, interesting fella, gets real into drugs, but somehow becomes like the most logical one out of these three stooges.
Yeah.
He comes to his senses eventually before everybody else does. Timothy was
not soon enough.
No,
and not enough of a way to actually try to prevent this from happening.
That's true. He didn't have a conscience, even though he was smart enough to get out of it. Timmy was a top scoring gunner with a 25 millimeter cannon. He got promoted to sergeant after being just top gunner is like a rank that you achieve.
I don't know how that applies outside of the Air Force or anything, but I'm assuming the title of Top Gunner would just mean you're the best with that specific type of weapon.
Okay, so not perfect or flawless with it, but pretty good. Got promoted to sergeant, and his racism shined once again as people outside of the troop that he was being the sergeant of realized that McVeigh was handing out all of the menial grunt jobs to the black people in his platoon. And
all the black guys got all the shit jobs.
Yep. So he didn't really try to hide his feelings at all. It seemed like he was talking to people about the Turner Diaries pretty much all the time. He actually had talked Fortier into reading it, I believe. But after that, he ends up being deployed from Fort Riley to Operation Desert Storm. Mm-hmm. He's over in Kuwait. He's over trying to expel the Iraqis from Kuwait. And this is kind of where he has, I wouldn't say his final form, but this is sort of where his life, I think, takes a pretty hard turn. While he's over there, he realizes that the American military and the Iraqi military are not on the same plane.
Yeah.
It's
not what he thought it was going to be.
No.
He thought he was going over there and it was going to be, I don't know if he thought it was going to be Vietnam, World War II style boots on the ground, that kind of battle, firefights, which there were instances of that, but in comparison to previous conflicts, it was relatively light. It was more so strategic bombings, tanks, that kind of stuff.
Well, and it was just a romp from the American military, just beating the shit out of a less prepared military.
Well, like by the time he got there, it was on the tail end of it.
He'd said that he had, what was it, 2 engagements?
Yeah.
One of them, he shot somebody's head off from like 1,000 yards away.
Yeah, and then the second one, I think he ended up shooting a tank.
He also did some other weird shit where he would take pictures of their victims. There were some questions about rumors going around that he had actually killed hostages.
Well, killed POWs, basically.
People
That they had surrendered during firefights, things like that, that then were essentially what you would consider in war under codes of like Geneva Convention and things like that.
It's a war crime.
War crimes.
And I don't really know if I buy into that. I don't think that he was quite as ruthless of a killer. I know it's very weird to hear that a guy that killed 168 people with a bomb wasn't ruthless, but there's something far more sinister about being able to look somebody in the eye that you're about to kill than just setting a bomb and walking away.
Yeah, here's the thing too: is you can be an evil person, but still have a survival instinct to keep yourself essentially. You know, he may have wanted to do certain things. He may have even done things that were borderline. Someone was going to stand up and to surrender, and he fires off a shot, something like that, and is just like, if it's in a gray area, you're just kind of like, well, he was standing up, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there were some rumors that there was essentially some prisoners being killed. I think they did interview like his commanding officer, and the commanding officer wouldn't provide any comment about it. Not really sure if that's because of, military information needing to stay confidential, or just basically not wanting to say anything because he would also be culpable for that had he not brought it to the attention of his superiors and he wasn't kicked out of the military.
You put your foot in your mouth when you admit to knowing something that you shouldn't know.
It was also here that he found basically what he thought he was going to be doing for the rest of his career. Yeah, Desert Storm didn't turn out the way that he'd wanted to, but within the military, he had found something that he felt that he was good at. He was, made a sergeant. He had control over people that ideologically he thought he should be in control of. And so this was probably looking like some place he's like, yeah, I can go and set up shop here, and this is what I'm going to be doing the rest of my life.
Well, and he was also praised. He received a Bronze Star, a National Defense Service Medal, the Southwest Asia Service Medal, an Army Service Ribbon. Don't know the difference between ribbons or medals. And then a Kuwaiti Liberation Medal. So he was a
decorated veteran.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know how big a Bronze Star is, just based upon gold, silver, and bronze, but that seems like a pretty big deal.
I think it's still a Bronze Star recipient is still a really big deal.
Yeah.
After this, he's looking at it from a career standpoint and saying, hey, I'm just going to go into the Special Forces next. That's my next path here after I have been in the military or been in the Army. So his dreams of joining the Green Berets, he had plans to try to do this prior to being sent off to Operation Desert Storm. And there was, an opportunity when he got back, probably pretty recently after he got back, for him to take basically like the entrance exam and physical tests and everything to see if he would be able to join the Green Berets. Well, 2 days into the first 21-day period of the tryouts or whatnot, he ends up dropping out.
Pretty fast.
He tells the fellow soldiers that he was serving with that he had an ankle injury which prevented him from being able to successfully do the physical trials, and he ends up telling his superiors when he's, letting them know that he can no longer continue, that he was not physically ready.
Which we kind of talked about this pre-episode. How can you be over at war and not come back ready more than 2 out of 21 days? How are you not physically ready coming back from war to be able to sustain more than 2 days?
Well, and I can see being like burnout mentally and everything, of being just like, I don't want to be around this. Physically, I could see you taking time to need to reacclimate at home. But this wasn't him getting off the plane and being like, am I ready? I'm doing the test now. He had some time to recover and recuperate. And again, I don't know what the schedule is for someone that's serving overseas, in an active war or anything. But I would assume that during that time period, you're encouraged to try to maintain both your body and your mind in as optimal of a state as you possibly can, because you are fighting the enemy. You need, more than anything, you need those skills, and you need your body to be in its top form while you're there.
For sure, yeah.
So, not really sure kind of what the actual reason. It could have been something as simple as the Green Berets were something much more difficult than he had anticipated, and where he had been relatively successful, in the Army, he maybe thought that that would translate over and he would be that easily successful in the Special Forces, and that turned out to definitely not be the case.
No. Once it turns out to not be the case, I think that he's just... Once you can't do what you want to do, there's really no reason to stick around.
Well, and after Desert Storm, where they had to call up a whole bunch of troops and things like that, after Desert Storm had ended, people started being released from the army. They didn't need as large of a standing army. And so one of the ways that you were guaranteed to stay within the military is you could join the Special Forces. So that was also his way of trying to essentially remain in the show.
Yeah, I guess I didn't think about that. He was trying to make sure that he could maintain a spot. So once he loses out on that, he ends up leaving the army. He is discharged in 1991.
He's honorably discharged in 91.
Yeah, so no major concerns, no major citations as far as that goes. His post-military life was plagued early on by trying to find a job again, and those excuses were many beyond, which I hate doing this because he's just such a bad guy. There are things that he's not totally wrong about, that he speaks about. Mm-hmm. One of the things was that he felt that veterans weren't properly reacclimated back into society, which for him, there was never going to be an amount of reacclimation that could ever really bring him back to society, I think.
But at the same time, that should be there regardless.
Yeah.
Whether that was going to be successful for him, that should be something that, without a doubt, was in place. Those guys go over there, and humans, for as much as we have been at war or been in some type of conflict throughout the, short time span of human history in the grand scheme of things, but as long as there has been humanity, there's been fighting. But at the same time, I don't think that that's how we're supposed to operate. It may have been different when we're trying to kill each other with spears and even swords and that kind of shit. But when you're in a modern war where it's urban warfare, things like that.
IEDs that'll just
where you're just
shred
constantly
somebody.
Fucking, and you're seeing your friends get blown up and all that kind of stuff. Just the PTSD, I don't think there's an escape from that. Even if someone coming back wasn't that traumatized, there's still going to be a level of traumatic events that have happened to that person. And to not have essentially a system in place to help those guys reacclimate, feel safe in the society that they're going to be living in, and try to help them find something that their skills can be put to use with, you can see in this instance, it's the most extreme version of the ball being dropped with him. But at the same time, it's a pretty big gap.
Oh, yeah.
That's within the military to not provide those types of services.
And unfortunately, he took his little journey out to Decker, Michigan, and decided to move in with Terry and his brother on their farm. Terry, again, just kind of an idiot. He flew over to the Philippines, and there's some questions as to how he found his wife. Was she a mail-order bride service that was posing as an escort service? Don't know.
Hey, sex work positive here, but
yep, we're all for it. The one part that I'm not about it is this was a 17-year-old Filipino girl that he took a liking to, ended up marrying, bring her back over to the United States. Not only was she 17, which is really gross in old Terry's position, she was also pregnant with another man's child that she would go on to have.
Yeah.
And I believe at the age of 2, while Terry was supposed to be watching this boy, he somehow ended up with a bag over his head and suffocated. Not going to say it. I think we all kind of understand what the implication was, saying that Terry was watching him and this kid ended up dying and it wasn't his. think we can all infer maybe a theory.
He left the bag out.
Yeah.
The bag wasn't getting played with. He made the bag look fun.
He put some
Showed the
M&Ms in there.
Yep.
Something. Yeah, just not a great way to go about it, but he's got himself a new, I'm sure, smoking hot 17-year-old Filipino wife, which I'm not saying it's wrong to go overseas to find yourself a wife. If you go to like the Philippines or Colombia or Thailand, I think it's okay to ask a question or two, right?
Yeah.
It seems.
A birth certificate if you're planning on getting married.
Yeah, something along those lines. He just keeps stepping on rakes. He's working futureless jobs. He develops a bit of a gambling habit, racks up a ton of gambling debts, and gets a loan on that, and defaults on the loan and doesn't pay anything back. So that combined with he found out that the military had overpaid him like $1,000.
Uh-huh.
So then the government comes knocking and saying, "Hey, we need our $1,000 back that we overpaid you for."
Take the fucking loss.
Yep.
Like,
Well, what are they gonna do?
again, this is one of those scenarios where you don't have to be in agreement with the actions, but at some point there is a common ground or like a gripe or something like that that people can look at and say, yeah, I kind of feel that way sometimes as well. Mm-hmm. And this is an instance of just being like really $1,000. Like, you know, the guy did serve in the military for I think like 3 years. He got out when he was 23.
Went to war.
Eat the $1,000 and don't fucking worry about it. Don't call someone about that kind of shit. Just consider it that you paid them a little bit of overtime for whatever they were fucking doing. So,
Yeah, their life was worth $1,000 more to them than you believed it was.
So he's already, you know, just even little instances like this with the combination of not being able to find work for someone who is a decorated veteran, and then at the same time having the government basically like, while you're already down, kind of put their boot on you and basically showing what your value was to them. Someone that already has something like this in their head that the government is an evil entity, this is just going to reinforce those ideas.
Well, there's nothing that's going to make you more angry about something like having to pay the government back $1,000 is when you're already up to your eyes in gambling debt that you can't pay anyway. So he made some comment about they're coming after everything that I own, everything that I've ever purchased, or everything. It was just some goofy line. It's like, you don't own shit. You didn't have any money. That was why you had so much gambling debt that you couldn't pay back, and now the government's wanting more money. I get that it's shitty, but eventually that's not on. It is a little on the government, but it's not the craziest thing that you could ever think of that would happen.
Yeah.
You're already mad about being shitty at gambling, which has to be a terrible feeling. And not being able to make any money. You're living with Terry, who's got his new Filipino wife, and he, upon leaving the military, believed that he was going to recruit a militia-style group of special operatives that would train on this farmland just in case the need would arise that the government came after them.
Well, he also wanted to start his own private military company or private military contract or something like that.
That's not how those things get started. Terry Nichols is not
No,
Black
I don't think
Rock.
these things are born on the farm.
Yeah.
He's even, up to this point, radicalized enough that he quits the NRA because they were too soft, he said. I have never witnessed an instance where the NRA had a soft position in regards to gun rights.
Not at all. I don't know if they were maybe different back then, but I doubt it.
Yeah.
It just, that's how far down this rabbit hole that he's gone. He also, again, just these different odd things that he does. He had a hand-drawn map of all the places that he believed would be most likely targets for a nuclear attack.
Yeah, so he had areas that were designated as least likely safe zones, that if there was a Cold War-esque, you know, nuclear joint strike and all that kind of stuff, we were wiped out. The survivalism part of him is just like, oh, we should go live out here. I think he was somewhere in Arizona.
Yeah, it was
this is one of the least likely areas to experience like either a nuclear attack or nuclear fallout.
the town that Route 66 starts in.
Is that what it
believe
is?
what it was, yeah. Which, I mean, it's... What data are you pulling that from besides just your own ass?
I don't know. You're trying to find an area that is farthest away from major cities, like totally away from major cities.
Well, and that probably that the federal government really never goes into either. Like,
Yeah.
there would never be a purpose to try to hurt the federal government by atomic bomb.
Yeah. So, a couple events coming up that happen are going to, whatever he's feeling now, these are going to be essentially the solidifiers that the government is out to get him and is out to get everybody. We come to August 1992, a little place in Boundary County, Idaho, called Ruby Ridge. And anyone outside of the States, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Ruby Ridge. I'm sure people in other countries have had their own versions of a Ruby Ridge or some instance. And if you're international, and once we describe this, send us these things that are like events that aren't worldly known in your country, but are interesting as shit, like the crazy fucking stuff we have in the United States.
So I took down a few of them on the list of future potential episodes, and it only bummed me out because I was doing research, or we were doing research for the Oklahoma City bombing, and just hearing it compared to other bombings that happened internationally. It's like, well, shit, this is a bummer, and I know about this a lot. I don't know if I want to jump into something that I don't know about that's going to be a bummer for a whole different country.
That is true.
But yeah, we want to hear about this stuff. I know that there's been, there was a bombing of pubs in, I think it was like the late 90s, maybe early 90s. Like
I know there was like a London subway bombing, things like that.
White nationalist type shit, and along with other terrorist events. We can do it now, just because I said the word. I've kind of come to a different understanding of the word terrorist, and this only fits in because Timothy McVeigh was a domestic terrorist. In doing research for this, that's how I'll tie it in, I've realized that there's still people that try to give Timothy McVeigh an out and a justification for what he did. And they do believe that. And like it or not, the word terrorist can be likened to damn near anybody. Osama bin Laden, terrorist. Tom Brady, terrorist. He terrorized those people in New York
Yes.
and NFL fans for forever. Michael Jordan, terrorized Detroit. He was a terrorist that way. George Washington, a hero in this country, a terrorist to the British.
Yep.
So it just all depends on how you look at a situation.
It depends on whose side you're on.
Yeah.
One person's terrorist is another person's hero or martyr.
And it's just such a different way to kind of look at things because maybe it's just me. I've always looked at it when I was a kid and we went into Iraq. Well, that's an issue. Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. They're all terrorists over there.
Yeah.
Then as you gain a different perspective and you see that it's not all the Iraqi people that are bad, it's just Saddam and his regime
People
that are
like
bad.
words in this country, and they like to use those words to label as big of a group of individuals as they possibly can. Terrorist is one of those words. Terrorist specifies a very specific group of individuals, if not individuals themselves, for the actions that they commit. That does not mean that a country, when they say it's a country of terrorists, no, they're in every single country, people are trying to meet their basic needs of food, water, shelter, keeping their families safe, and that's the priority for most people. You do have shitty people everywhere across the globe, regardless of what color you are, who you worship, or what language you speak. And just like we want to go ahead and point the finger and say we have there's terrorists in all these other countries, we have domestic terrorism that occurs all the time. School shooters, terrorists, domestic terrorists. You want to talk about the people that fucking stormed the Capitol and shit on January 6th. Technically, those people are domestic terrorists.
A lighter version. There were still some deaths in there, and it was just too many people that did it, but at the same time, it would be classified that exact same way.
Yeah.
All of the people that ran into the buildings for 9/11, those were all terrorists too. Those weren't homegrown terrorists, though. There are terrorists within these borders, and during this time, that really wasn't something that the public was keen on. There wasn't a real understanding that the reign of terror that the KKK had put throughout this country was homegrown, and it was something that was radicalized here.
Yep.
There's a lot of denial, I think, in this country, and I'm sure every country has this, the denial of, why would we ever grow terrorists here? What could be so bad about this country, the freest country in the world, that would cause something like this to happen?
That comes into play huge when they're trying to figure out, once this actually goes down, who is to blame for this. And on some people's minds, the furthest thing that they can be thinking of is it's someone that was raised here and lives here would commit something like this. And so that kind of gives you a sense of what the climate was, I guess, at the time for who would be responsible for these types of things. So going back a little bit further before it happens, kind of still in the lead up to this. August 1992, we come to Ruby Ridge. So Ruby Ridge, going to get its own episode at some point, so I'm just going to barely touch on it. There was a group of survivalists up in the mountains of Idaho.
Randy Weaver.
Randy Weaver had a bench warrant out for his arrest for failure to appear in a court case regarding owning illegal firearms. Is that correct?
Yep. Okay. Just a little deeper in. Where they were in Boundary County, Ruby Ridge, up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. You and I went up there and golfed last year. One of the most beautiful places on earth.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. One of the pitfalls of that was northern Idaho has become, and I don't know how the migration happened, a center for neo-Nazis and white nationalists.
Yeah.
So as beautiful as this place is, there's
so close to Canada. Friendliest place on earth. You just have sandwich right in there.
And Randy had an aberration, whatever it was, that the world was coming to an end. His family needed to move out of civilization. They end up finding the spot in Boundary County. They end up starting to hang out with these neo-Nazis at their compounds. He was never a full-fledged member. I can't think of one thing that would be so great at a neo-Nazi picnic that would ever make me want to spend any time with them. He found some. I know that I don't know for a fact, but I'm willing to bet just based on that, probably a pretty racist dude, found himself a home there. Was going in and out of one of these compounds and was pulled aside by an undercover cop, and they discussed him being great at gunsmithing. So he asked him if he could saw off barrels of a shotgun that he was going to then sell to the Nazi compound. Well, that becomes a felony because when you alter a shotgun and you cut the barrels off, you are, illegally modifying a firearm?
Yeah, and the intention of that is for a different use than a standard long barrel shotgun.
So you get felonies for that. He had been charged with them. The government used it. And I'm not saying that this is right. I'm not saying that this is wrong. I think that the government fucked up quite a few times in this, but Randy Weaver isn't a good person in this whole thing. But he ends up getting these warrants getting these charges unless he turns state's evidence on the neo-Nazis. He decides not to even go in and stand trial, refuses to help out the government because he's anti-government himself. So he basically hunkers down in this cabin kind of semi-compound in Boundary County, and the FBI needs to get a hold of him to bring him in.
I think it was the marshals. They sent marshals out to actually to arrest.
They sent him out in two groups. They were to sneak around the kind of area that they were in and get eyes on the subject. He had his wife, I believe 2 or 3 daughters, his son Sam, and then another friend that had been charged in the case too was up there as well. And once we do the episode, all these names will come through. Essentially, there is a situation where the dog notices the marshals, he barks, Sam and the friend run down, there is a skirmish back and forth. One side says they fired first, the other side says they fired first, of course. Sam gets killed and the friend gets wounded. There's a standoff that takes place over a very long period of time. Randy Weaver's wife actually gets shot by a sniper that kind of draws the ire of,
I believe he hits
Timothy McVeigh.
He ends up hitting Weaver.
Yeah.
The bullet goes
Weaver was
through.
also shot as well.
Weaver was also shot, survives, but the bullet went through Randy and his wife killing her. Now, the sniper on this, and this somehow crazily comes through, again, it's some type of common thread,
FBI idiots.
is...
Marshall idiots.
Yes, is sniper Lon Horuchi. And I'm not sure exactly who he worked for, if he worked for DEA, ATF, who it was.
I think he was ATF.
But he was one of the guys that essentially had been the sniper that they said took the shot that actually killed the wife. So there's two ways to essentially look at this. If you're on the side of being like, okay, even looking at it from an impartial standpoint, the government fucked up and escalated the situation. Yeah. There were other ways to handle it. They could have essentially done this to where they hit the last resort about 3 steps too. About 3 steps too soon. So, and it's big to acknowledge that this was a government fuck up. The handling of it went down from FBI mishandling, ATF, DEA, marshals, all of them.
Randy Weaver actually successfully sued the U.S. government for
a civil suit, like $3 million.
It was either 3.5 or 3.1 million, where each one of his surviving children got $1 million, and then he got like 100,000 or 500,000. Yeah.
So the end result essentially is one dead marshal and Weaver's son and wife were all killed during the standoff. So to somebody that has already kind of had their thinking leaning one way, this just essentially solidifies that if you are into guns, that the government is going to essentially come after you by any means necessary, regardless of whatever your rights may be. Now, that's glossing over a ton of details about skipping skipping court, skipping your warrant, trying to essentially not run from it, but hunker down to not take, to not, what am I trying to say here? To not follow within the rules of the law.
Yeah.
And when you don't follow within the rules of the law, there's consequences. Well, to somebody like this, those consequences don't really have any meaning.
Well, not to mention his ties to the neo-Nazis in the area weren't exactly a turnoff for McVeigh.
Yeah, exactly. So Ruby Ridge happens. McVeigh is looking at this and saying, see, been right all along, this is how it starts. Well, it doesn't take too much longer because we end up coming to February 28th of 1993, which is when the Waco
government had
siege,
a tough run in this time frame.
Which is when the Waco siege actually takes place. Now, go back, listen to the Waco episode. We go super in depth on it about David Koresh, the Branch Davidians, all of it, the siege. Basically, just in a nutshell, you had a group of a religious cult, the Branch Davidians, led by a guy named David Koresh, who was into some really weird shit. Basically planned himself to have this commune where he was able to have sex with all the women. There were families there. He would basically use them to do the work and all that kind of stuff. He would basically use the women as his own personal harem, and apparently he had such a charismatic type of, persona that the husbands were just like, yeah, if it's for the Messiah or whatever he had painted himself out to be. I'm trying to remember it. He was Jesus.
He told him that God was to separate all of the husbands from the wives, and he was the one that would then be able to have sex with the wives, and the husbands were only for procreation.
Okay.
So just wacko. Wacko nuts. God also told him to have many young wives.
Yes.
So he was banging kids. They were illegally modifying and selling guns. They were purchasing guns. They
were stocking up. They were stockpiling weapons because they did have this end of days type thing where the government would come after them. Well, when you run a cult and you're having sex with kids and all that kind of stuff, yeah, the government should probably come after you. So Waco ends up basically leading into a 2-month, almost 2-month government siege of the Waco compound. And end result of it, again, go back, listen to the episode, but there is a fire actually started within the compound, and there's no fire trucks on scene. Not sure why there was no fire trucks on scene, but
they didn't think the Branch Davidians were going to light it on fire.
I know, I thought that, but at the same time, you're out there kind of in the desert, you're driving around a bunch of trucks and all that kind of stuff. You think you'd want to have a fire truck out there.
Probably an ambulance too.
Yeah.
Just on the standby.
But everyone is essentially trapped in this by their design of being trapped in this place. There is a bit of a firefight that happens early on in the siege in which some people are shot and killed. That escalates it, of course, but the full escalation is when essentially the fire happens. This is all during the age of the 24-hour news cycle. So this thing is being covered, the entire time that it's happening. The fire is happening live. Timothy McVeigh is actually watching this. He's watched the entire Waco siege. In fact, Timothy McVeigh attempted to drive to Waco. I think he was living in Texas at this time.
Kansas.
He drives to Waco to support David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. Now, of course, there's a perimeter around that, so he's not allowed in there. He's arguing with the DEA or whoever is kind of running that about it being a public road. Regardless, he's turned away. But he's also out there passing out, to people that have gathered, passing out all of this anti-government, white nationalist type brochures and stuff.
Bumper stickers, too.
Bumper stickers.
Bumper stickers must have been a big thing in the early 90s.
Oh, they still... Hey, have you... Come on.
Unfortunately, yes. He was also selling copies of the Turner Diaries. So he was trying to make a little bit of money off this. He was also continuing to try to push this anti-government rhetoric around a time when the government hadn't taken a real win publicly in a while.
No, 2 back-to-back losses with Ruby Ridge and the Waco siege basically painted the government out to look like they had kind of a hair trigger and were escalating situations. Again, it's easy to look at this, and this is not us standing up. It's just looking at it from a rational perspective. When you're seeing something in the news cycle, you are seeing a snippet of that from a distance away. Yeah, you're going to panels of experts that might be talking about different things, but the information pertinent to what is happening within those situations is only known to those people whose job it is to react to those situations. Now, those people are humans. Do they make mistakes? Do they make the incorrect decisions? Yes, that happens. In this situation, the escalation led to all of these families essentially dying in this fire. There were a lot of victims in the Waco siege. Government does not look good. It doesn't look good when you have dead women and children. Had this been just men and a whole bunch of guns, we would be talking about a completely different thing right now. But there were families involved, and because of that, you have to go ahead and hold that escalation for as long as possible. Do whatever you can. I don't know what the right thing to do in that situation is. It wasn't this, but I don't know what do you do, if they're not releasing them and they start the fight? That's the thing. It's such a complex fucking topic that it's hard to kind of pinpoint down where exactly you stand.
And you know what you definitely don't do? You don't invite the sniper that killed Randy Weaver's wife to Waco.
Yes.
He makes his second appearance, although there's no confirmation that he ever shot anybody or anything like that. Timmy gets a hold of this information and starts distributing flyers that have his, the sniper's home address and phone number. Gene, was that his name?
Lon Marucci. Yep. So, we're going to get to it here in just a second where little Timmy goes next. Before that, let's hit the bathroom.
Okay.
Oh my God, Adam. What is that up in the sky? It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's socials. Oh my God. It's faster than Instagram.
That's historically high pod on Instagram.
More powerful than X?
It's historically high, historically HI on X.
Able to leap tall threads in a single bound.
Back to historically high pod on Threads.
And, I guess there's still Gmail, right?
We got that too. That is historically high podcast at gmail.com.
All right, guys, back to the show.
Much more lax, correct? Not requiring background check or I would assume still IDs, right? But I'm sure that's probably if someone is just looking to make the sale, probably not a lot of emphasis on the ID sometimes.
An ID in the 80s can be faked pretty easily, and that'll come into play too.
Yeah.
But essentially, as a straw buyer, he goes in, he takes all the risk, he gets the background checks, he purchases the weapon. Then when you take that weapon to a gun show, you can sell that weapon for a 25% markup, a 30% markup.
Because someone doesn't want to have to deal with the pesky background check and the record of owning the firearm.
Yeah, which, it should give anybody a little pause and a little concern as to why you would want to do it that way. There's always the talk of, well, I don't want the government in my business, and why should that be? I think it's probably logical just to do background checks on everybody. That to me doesn't seem, I mean, maybe it's because a background check on me wouldn't return anything even questionable, so that's why I feel that way.
If part of your stipulation of buying a gun is that you're not going to do a background check or you don't want it to be tied to you, probably shouldn't be owning a gun. That's probably in that list of reasons why you probably, shouldn't have one. And I've never hit the gun show circuit. I could be just talking out of my ass right now, but just from what I know about it, it is, I'm sure there are, just like in all walks of life, there's different aspects to the culture. There's probably people that are really into like sport shooting, really into that kind of stuff that go to those things. But then there are probably people that are on the other extreme side of it that are shitty, whatever you want to call it. And Timothy McVeigh falls right into line with that. So while he's also doing this gun show circuit, he gets a reputation essentially of being, of course, a racist, having racist ideology. And then he's still, talking to anybody he can about the Turner Diaries and all that kind of stuff, still probably selling copies of that. This is where he's also passing out Lon Horuchi, the sniper's name and address at gun shows in the hopes that someone from, I think he called it like the Patriot Front, Patriot Group, something like that, would take it upon themselves to go and kill him.
Yeah, to me that doesn't seem like something a well-adjusted human being would do, but, who am I to judge?
He's also selling hats that say DEA that have bullet holes in them. There's a couple other things that he sells. I know he passes out pamphlets for certain things. But yeah, really, really kind of finds his niche.
He found his groove. Mm-hmm. Along with that groove, he had moved down to kind of part-time Kingman, Arizona with Michael Fortier and his wife. The two became pretty close. Timmy was actually Michael's best man in his wedding, and another bonding experience, they also did meth together. Mm-hmm. So
as one does.
Yeah. As somebody...
As two rascally friends are bound to do.
Who hasn't done a little meth with their friend? He wasn't a big fan of it. He actually kind of grew tired of Michael's drug use, and they fell kind of back apart. He ended up heading back to Terry's brother's farm, where things escalated as they started experimenting with explosives.
Yeah, they start teaching him how to mix different chemicals together. Man, you see it in videos where people want to blow shit up washing machines with tannerite and stuff like that. And then that half of those, the footage cuts out, and when they find out somebody's been impaled by a fucking agitator or something firing out of the washing machine. But yeah, it's the kind of shit that you see like, hey, watch this. So they're building bombs out of chemicals and stuff like that up here. I think they even kind of progressed to maybe, or I don't know if McVeigh kind of progressed to it on his own, is starting to build pipe bombs. So you know how to make this one thing go boom. Let's go ahead and try to make it more deadly when it goes boom.
Yeah, let's add some shrapnel to this party. He believed that this 1994 Firearms Restriction Act was going to affect his livelihood.
It's the Clinton ban on assault rifles.
Yeah, say what you will about Clinton, did some good things, did some pretty bad things too. I don't think that this was the worst thing in the world, a federal firearms ban on semi-automatic weapons. There was another caveat to it that there was supposed to be like a 5-day waiting period for the background check, and that apparently
reasonable.
Yeah, that apparently enraged him that it would take him 5 whole days before he would be cleared to get a weapon, which in his line of work maybe was a big deal. But
what do you mean they're going to check my fucking criminal record?
Yeah, dude, 5 days doesn't seem like the craziest thing in the world to get something that you have to have so much responsibility to own. I mean, we've all made a Christmas list and had to wait till Christmas to see if we got our gifts.
Exactly.
Same idea. After that, he rebelled against the government by taking pictures, driving to Area 51 where there were no pictures allowed because he's a badass rebel. Mm-hmm. He takes pictures at Area 51. He drives down to Gulfport, Mississippi to watch UN activities because there's rumors on the gun show circuit that the UN is bringing in Soviet tanks to take over the United States and create this giant communist country, even though we just fucking got done fighting the entire Cold War.
Motherfucker, we got our own tanks.
Yeah.
In fact, we just went over to Iraq and we're blowing up a bunch of Russian tanks. Our tanks are better.
he gets down there. He sees that these military vehicles are being retrofitted for use as far as like in poverty-stricken countries, and sees that, oh, well, you know, that's not true, but they're definitely up to something. Right around this time, he goes ahead and takes a trip up to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and visits Ruby Ridge and sees the area where this great governmental...
This last stand took place.
Yeah.
Or whatever the fuck it was.
Yeah, so he's just kind of amping himself up.
He's hitting all the hits. He's hitting all the landmarks.
It's like he's trying to get more fired up about this. He's just trying to push himself far enough while still kind of being open about some of this stuff. And I didn't dive a whole lot into the conspiracy theories on the board. I think I could probably go from memory on most of them. But there is sort of like I don't know, there's a belief that there may have been more actors at play and that he may have had some support from either a white nationalist movement. There's conspiracy theories that the government tricked him into doing it, which I don't think he would ever be friends enough with the government to pull this shit off.
It's the same conspiracy theory, the way they tie it together. It's the same thing about like George Bush planning 9/11. It's that Clinton planned the bombing to somehow draw attention away from like the Clinton scandal.
The blowjob.
Yeah, like I got a blowjob, so we're gonna need to fucking blow up a building.
Just a lot of different stuff. John Doe number 2 is something that we will talk about a little bit later, but he told people that he was planning on creating some action and making a mark, but he never, I think, really said, hey, I'm going to go bomb this building to a lot of people.
He ends up telling, there were some instances where I think where he was, you know, he'd always been vocal about his dislike of the government, of course, all that kind of stuff. He worked a security job that was unrelated to the armored car one, I think, and that he would talk to this night security guard guy that he was working with, and they kind of had similar views, but then McVeigh was way more extreme and started talking about, like, I can't remember if he was talking about blowing up or acquiring machine guns, illegal weapons, and this guy was like, this guy sounds like fucking serious. He tried to record him at one point and then being like, hey, remember that stuff you were talking about the other day? Give me some more details on that. And I don't know if McVeigh kind of maybe knew what he was doing or something like that, but basically didn't provide anything within that conversation that he could use to turn in.
He started talking about Star Trek.
Yeah, exactly.
And apparently this, I don't know if this is a bad blow for your community, and I wanted to ask you about this.
No, this man's a fucking psychopath. I know you're going to say it's the Star Wars comment that we're going to get to.
Okay.
But no, this has no fucking bearing. Leave that alone. Except for that. The quote is so stupid. It does not go against Star Wars.
Hey, it's all right.
It's stupider
we're
than
just
the
friends.
sequel trilogy. The comment and the point he tries to make is stupider than the new Star Wars movies. I think he does end up mentioning to Fortier his plan, and basically is like, "Hey, you want to get in on this?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "I'm not in on this level of fucking extremism." So during this time frame, he also was kind of, you know, he has an idea that he's been experimenting with explosives. It's going to be something involving a bomb. He starts kind of looking to pick the site, and it's got to have 2 out of 3 places within the building to meet his qualifications. It has to have offices of either the ATF, FBI, or DEA. It has to have 2 out of those 3 within the same building that he's going to pick. Target sites that he had kind of kicked around were Missouri, Texas, Arizona, Arkansas, aside from the Murrah building in Oklahoma City. There was one called the Simmons Tower in Little Rock, Arkansas, but because it had a ice cream parlor that was in the first floor, like a business, he wasn't going to do that. That's going to go ahead and be a point when we talk about the actual bombing that I have a hard time talking about the part that's going to come up.
Yeah, I if you can't do it, I got it. That's very interesting because we will talk about his ultimate death sentence that he gets. Ice cream plays an odd part in that too.
Oh, okay. So December 94 is when he ends up picking the Murrah building as the, you know, place he's. I think it's got 2 of the offices. It also has a Office of Housing and Urban Development, which is a government agency. It's got a couple different offices as well. Here's the thing. he apparently doesn't look. Is he just trying to kind of like look up the building, and he goes down the list and he's like, okay, I'm looking for ATF. He's just looking for acronyms. I'm looking for ATF, FBI, DEA. Oh, it has those. Then he's out of the building. Because apparently, with as much research as he did for these buildings, really didn't do that much research.
Oh, he hit the goddamn jackpot with the Murrah building, though. I want to say, I think it's on the next board coming up. There were 15 or 16, excuse me, government agencies all held within this building.
There is, but at the same time, the ones that we discussed that actually have anything to do with what his gripe against the government is maybe 2 or 3 of those have offices that do that. The other ones are simply like government agencies that handle things like taxes or handle things like Social Security or anything like that. But okay, I will do the Star Wars quote, so it'll just explain his ideology. This is how fucking crazy this guy is. So he's having a conversation with, I think it's Terry Nichols, right? Yep. So they're discussing essentially blowing up this building. And he's, McVeigh's fucking fired up about it. They're having a conversation.
Oh, it's Fortier, not Nichols.
Oh, is it Fortier?
Yeah, because this is when Fortier finally decides he's out.
Okay. He likens the building. He's like, there's innocent people in that building. And he's like, yeah, but listen, there were people on the Death Star that were just working there on the Death Star. They were, I don't know how much in detail he went to it, but I'm assuming he meant that there were janitors and cafeteria workers and all that kind of stuff. They were in support roles, but they all worked for the evil empire. And because they all worked for the evil empire, they deserve to die or be victims of this.
They're complicit.
They're complicit by simply working these jobs that just happen to receive their paycheck from the U.S. government. That's the only qualifier these people had to have, was that their paycheck, came from the government.
And if you really think about it, just the 2 things that you mentioned, I mean, the IRS and taxes. Taxes are the devil. Taxes, they should be illegal. That's a common thing that's said. Social Security, we're talking about socialism. Those things I'm sure weren't really top of mind and things that really excited Timmy a whole lot. Along that time in choosing the Murrah building, they had started to purchase ammonium nitrate, and they were selling it because there was, again, another rumor going around the gun shows for survivalists that they were going to ban ammonium nitrate, which had something to do with the bomb that was created in, check me on this, World Trade Center, 1992.
Yeah, so for those of people that aren't aware, everyone knows about 9/11. But there was a previous World Trade Center bombing that took place that a van exploded in a parking garage, right?
I think, it must have been the underground parking garage.
And this was actually done by was it?
Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, it was a member of Al-Qaeda.
I'm bringing his name up here in a second. I don't know why. 1993, Al-Qaeda were the people that did it. Ramzi Youssef.
That's right.
Was the leader of the Al-Qaeda terrorist cell
and
that came
escaped.
over here. Yeah, he actually ends up escaping from the bombing. He's on the run during this time, which brings up a kind of fun, interesting conspiracy that are really the only things that I can pull joy out of, besides making fun of Nichols for having a Filipino wife, or a mail order bride, and then Timothy McVeigh's just nerdy attire and his obsessions. You got to find things to nitpick about these, but after that explosive happens, ammonium nitrate sales are supposedly supposed to go away. So they are selling them.
Be highly regulated. Because ammonium nitrate, it's a fertilizer. So that's why you hear the term fertilizer bomb. So ammonium nitrate is essentially a chemical that is usually used for fertilizing crops. I'm not sure what the conversion is to number of acres or anything like that, but basically it is explosive once you get it to a certain combustion point. So it's not like gas where you can just light it and it'll just, the vapors will just light. But once it does get to that point, it's much more explosive than just standard, gas would be by itself. So yeah, between August and October of 94, him and Nichols are just going around acquiring as much of this ammonium nitrate fertilizer as they possibly can. Now, they end up getting a hold of, kind of various amounts from different places, and I think they end up scoring. I'm trying to remember the exact amount because it goes into. I'll discuss the amount of the bomb, and that'll kind of play into how much they acquired for the fertilizer, but they're basically posing to get this as like farmers. They're like, we need this for, we're in Kansas, we need this for cornfields or something like that. So they're able to, based on the amount of acreage that they're giving these people that are selling it, basically chemical companies, farm supply companies, they're able to acquire a pretty hefty amount of this ammonium nitrate fertilizer.
Over 2 tons.
Over 2 tons.
So over 4,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate. They kind of had I don't know if this is like a disgusting Blues Brothers mission from God type situation that him and Nichols got going on. They're going around, they're buying all this ammonium nitrate. They end up robbing this guy who was like a regular on the circuit of the gun shows. And they robbed this dude's home to the tune of over $60,000 worth of guns, jewelry, and gold and silver.
So this guy's name was Roger Moore, no relation to the James Bond actor. But this guy had previously set them up when they were messing around with explosive up on the farm, had set them up with these like sticks of explosives. Not quite TNT, but I'm trying to remember exactly what they were. But he provided them like 8 of these like either detonator sticks or something, sticks made of some type of explosive.
The
so that's
gel explosives, is that what they were?
No, because that was when they went to the mining company.
Okay.
But they knew this guy because he was like a gun collector and everything. They probably had an interaction with this guy before and kind of knew what his worth was. Yeah, they go back and they actually rob him for like $60,000 worth of all that stuff. Because this is going to happen in, a little bit faster from a time frame perspective, we still got 7 months to go. Why is he not like I'm trying to figure out why he's not arrested for this, because the guy knows who it is.
No.
Oh, I thought that he was there.
No, he wasn't there. In fact, later on, I think it was before the bombing, he writes the guy a letter and he's like, hey, government knocked over your house. It was a raid on your house. They took all of your stuff.
How would he know? He's basically saying, this is me. Like, how would fucking McVeigh know?
So after the bombing, when they're searching through Terry Nichols' house, they find all this dude's like gold and jewelry and shit like that they clearly had just stolen.
And they're using this to essentially fund the purchase of all of this stuff because neither of them are working fucking jobs.
Yeah, they go through and have kind of a wild time as they follow around the NHRA drag race circuit with the sole intention of buying something called liquid nitromethane.
Yeah, and hydrazine.
And hydrazine is it's a super concentrated like jet fuel, isn't it?
Yeah, so they use it for drag racers, things like that. And so basically what he's trying to do is he's trying to find something to jumpstart the ammonium nitrate fertilizer. He has to have essentially something that has a lower flash point or a lower explosive point that can just be set off with like a normal explosive, something like that.
And when you mix that with ammonium nitrate, shit really gets popping.
Yeah.
So they're going around to these drag racing events trying to buy nitromethane off of, I guess, like the NHRA.
So the NHRA is the governing body it's the National Hot Rod Association, I think it's what it stands for. So these are the guys that oversee all the funny car races, drag races, things like that. And they're going around, and of course at these races you have these suppliers that these guys are supposed to be getting fuel for their cars for and everything. You have these, competitors as well. So they're going around to these booths and are basically like, hey, we just need to get some, a few 55-gallon drums or as much nitromethane as you guys will sell us. And they're like, well, this stuff is like, they're not even showing up in like car racing outfits or anything. He's like wearing his fatigues.
Yeah, he showed up in his fatigues.
He showed up in his fatigues, and so you have this guy in military fatigues asking to basically buy jet fuel that's also can be used as an explosive, and everyone is like, no. And even calling around to the other vendors and being like, hey, don't sell to this guy, don't distribute. Well, you end up having such a large distribution network and guys so fucking thirsty to try to make a sale that after going around to several of these events, like in different places in the country, he finally finds a guy that sells him 3 fucking barrels.
He had the perfect disguise, though. He was starting himself a motorcycle club.
So he walks in with just a standard like leather jacket or vest, and he's like, "Hey, I need to get nitromethane for me and my buddies who are starting a motorcycle racing club." Now, this guy also states that the amount that they would normally sell someone for like a motorcycle racing club would be a number of like limited gallons. Like it takes, because you can dilute the nitromethane.
Yeah.
Because if I think if you just burn it straight and the motor is just a factory or not, a reinforced motor, it'll probably fucking blow that thing out. So you can also mix it with other fuel in order to raise the octane level of it. If anyone knows that that's not correct, please message us. I'm winging it here.
I bought it.
Yeah, exactly.
Excuse
I'm
me,
not
it sounded
I'm
good.
not a fucking bomb maker. I'm just going off of what we researched here. But so they end up being able to acquire 3 like 55-gallon drums of this shit. They also break into a rock quarry, drill through a padlock, and break into a rock quarry where they have these gel blasting caps in Kansas. And basically, these are the charges that after, they drill down in, drill the deep or drilled like the skinny, really long holes and pack them full of explosive. The blasting caps go on top, so it'll ignite the explosive. That's where you get like the videos of like the explosives going off and then the rock slides and all that kind of stuff. It's how they clear also roads or like hills for roads. Mm-hmm. So they break in. They're like, hey, oh, by the way, it's just like milk. Go get the ones in the back. They're the freshest. They're the ones that'll stay good the longest, and they're the ones that have the most pop to them. So they go and they end up stealing a bunch of these blasting caps from this quarry. So literally just committing this string of crimes, and nothing is tied back to them at this point.
Yeah, and it begs the question, was all this shit... Damn, that last hit got me. Is all of this happening while being turned into the government and the government's not doing anything about it? Is he a government agent that's procuring all this stuff? It's dumb to think that as a theory, if you did, just partially because if you're the government and you're trying to sanction this bombing, just give him the material. Like, there doesn't need to be... Terry Nichols isn't going to be like, yeah, dude, where'd you get all this stuff? Oh, it just showed up in the mail. He's not going to think you're a government agent. He's going to be like, cool, we can make the bomb. Nobody's going to question him just coming into all these materials if the government were to give it to him.
What do you mean nobody? You don't think he would question that it would be like a sting or something like that? He's so fucking like paranoid.
Yeah, there's that, but also why would the government, if they were working in concert together... I don't know
the mind of this man. He's crazy.
But working with the government's probably the last thing he'd want to do.
That's also, he would think it was from the government. I'm not accepting this from you fuckers.
He wanted to do it himself. The bomb... this is so... I have such a hard time even thinking about this. The bomb was supposed to consist of 5,000... pounds or 2,300 kilos of ammonium nitrate, 1,200 pounds or 540 kilos of nitromethane, and 350 pounds or 160 kilos of gel explosive packed in 16 55-gallon drums.
Yep.
Whenever I think about that, my mind immediately goes to Breaking Bad when they had the drums of the...
methylamine?
Yeah, that they were using. And just thinking about how much 16 drums would look like in a row.
I think they said it weighed... Well, because it was like 7,000 pounds through all of that. It was a total of 7,000 pounds. Kind of jumping back just a little bit to tie a little bit more to the 40ers, Michael and Lori.
Yeah,
so, yeah, he did tell them what his plan was, that he was going to be bombing a federal building. 40-year declines. He also goes back and then shows them, once he figures out what type of bomb he's going to use, he goes back and he shows them and sits down with them, and they're basically having a conversation about the design of this bomb. He's telling them how many pounds of this there's going to be, how many pounds of that. It's going to be 7,000. We're going to go ahead and shape the charge in order for maximum effect. They know that they're going to have to put this in the back of like a box van. So they end up renting a Ryder truck. Which, did you look into it? Ryder's not still around anymore, right?
I think they are.
Are they?
Yeah, RYDER. They're yellow and red?
Yeah, so a Ryder truck was the same thing that was used during the World Trade Center.
Yeah.
It was over, and I don't know if that was just the only game in town. U-Haul wasn't around yet or anything like that. I don't know if it were Penske. I don't know if it was just the Ryder was the only one that you could rent box trucks from.
It could be that. It also could be in order to get the amount of tonnage to haul something like that. Maybe Ryder was the only one in that class.
That's true. It's very weird that it has that similarity as well. And then also I saw a picture during the demolition of the, after the building had been blown up and they had to demolish it. And during the actual demolition, someone took a picture and there's a fucking Ryder truck in shot of the picture or in shot of the building as it's collapsing.
What are the odds?
Yeah. It had to have been parked there, right?
Yeah. I do like that he tries to go back to Michael and his wife and give them like a stepbrothers type pitch as to why they need to get back in on the business. Like, I know you guys didn't like the first plan of me blowing up a building that has innocent people inside of it, but this is the good kind of bomb that I'm going to build that's going to kill those people.
Look how cool this bomb is, right? You guys are in, right?
Yeah.
Possible investors?
Possibly you.
Boats and hoes.
So, throughout this whole entire thing, they are not great at making bombs. There were multiple failed attempts. During this time, there was some interesting travel that I'm only going to throw in now for a little bit later if we ever get to conspiracy theories. Terry is making some trips back to the Philippines with and without his wife. And he makes like 12 trips or something like that. It was a fair amount of times over a few years that this is going on, that he's making these trips back and forth. And they're really not getting it. Now, Timothy says that Nichols was kind of like a useful idiot. Like, he could get him the materials, but Timmy was the one that was making the bombs go boom. Other sources have said that they weren't very good at it. I'm more willing to bet that they weren't real good at it. But they finally did detonate successfully a prototype in the desert out in Arizona. And so they had their proof of concept. Along those lines, we did forget to mention that the attack was planned for April 19th, 1995, which is the second anniversary of Waco.
Yes.
And the 220th anniversary of the Battle of Concord and Lexington.
See, I think it was supposed to be
Patriots.
correct, but at the same time, had that not been the date of those battles, he still would have picked the date based upon the anniversary of Waco.
Yeah, it was just a happy accident that Lexington and Concord were
It was
in there.
something for him to tie it into that.
Yeah.
To his perceived patriotism.
Well, and along with that, I mean, we'll talk about the stuff that he's found with in the vehicle. But April 14th, 1995, we're hitting hard timeline now. McVeigh checks into a room at the Dreamland Motel in Junction City, Kansas. As he does this, he's created this alter ego. They've done a lot of things with like alter egos and fake names as far as like signing for different documents. But he made himself a fake ID under the name Robert Kling. And he gets to Junction City. He checks into the Dreamland Motel. That gets a little dicey when we talk about the search for him. April 15th, he rents a Ford Ryder truck with a fake ID under this name, Robert Kling.
Ends up checking in under his actual name in his hotel. He gets caught up because she hands him the registration to fill out for the room. He goes to fill it out and realizes too late that he's already put his name on it, his actual name, and that it would look too suspicious if he was like, oh, I put the wrong name on it. He could get away if he would have filled out like the address first, because that also comes into play. But the address that he had on his driver's license was the one that was in
Michigan.
That's right. It was the brother's farm. But yeah,
The license plate he had on his car, though.
Huh?
License plate he had on his car was Arizona.
Yes.
She notices that. She's like, well, why is it from Arizona? The guy's like, I travel around Timmy goes, I travel around on the gun circuit, so I'm a nomad. So my car's registered in one state. I have another state on my license. oops, I fucked up and just wrote my actual name.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I know that he wasn't the super mastermind I think that people give him credit for, is because if you're going to try to assume an alter ego and try to hold this the right way, you got to know that when you go to write your name on anything, it's got to be your fake name. So you know he was TIM before he realized it, and then looked up at her, and she was looking at him. He's like, fuck, I got to finish this. I can't ask for a new one. There's no way that she's going to buy it that I forgot my own name. And once you fall down that rabbit hole, I mean, you start making mistakes. And this...
He's like, my name is Timotheus Barnaby.
Yeah. You don't have an ID for that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, yeah, after that debacle happens, he gets his poop in a group, and he rents this Ryder truck under the name Robert Kling. April 16th, him and Terrence go ahead and drive into Oklahoma City. They drop off the getaway car, a 1977 yellow Mercury Marquis. It was a few blocks away from the Murrah building. And what they did, which comes back again conspiracy-wise, is he gets out, he pulls the license plate off, he puts a note in the window that says something along the lines of, please don't tow, we'll be back April, a few days later, like April 22nd or some shit like that.
Will be moved within 2 to 3 days, needs new battery and cable.
Yeah. So somehow, by all that is lucky and something that sort of creates a conspiracy but then pokes some holes in some conspiracies, they drop this car off. It doesn't have a plate on the back of it, and somehow it doesn't get towed. The 17th and 18th are devoted to McVeigh and Nichols building the bomb in the back of the Ryder truck. Mixing chemicals. They pulled off into like a forest or some shit like that. It was like a national park.
It was a park like around a lake, I believe. So they had transported, and when they were taking and stealing these materials, they were storing them in storage units, like, Breaking Bad style. So they end up transporting, the bomb's not built, but they load up all of the stuff in this Ryder truck that they had rented and go to this park. They start basically with a scale and like jugs, start mixing the chemicals like the nitromethane in with the ammonium nitrate to the mix that they had, found during their little beta testing for it, I guess. At one point, while Nichols is filling or mixing, he sees like a father and son that have put in a boat to start fishing. And he tells McVeigh, he's like, he stops, closes the door on it. And McVeigh's like, what are you doing? He's like, there's literally someone fishing on the lake. He's like, we're on a timetable. He's like, you need to fucking open the door and get to doing this. Jumping back just a little bit prior to this, so Nichols kind of starts getting a little bit of cold feet, and he's at the point where he's got at that point he has 2 kids.
Yeah.
He's got his wife, and he's like, I don't think I can go through this. Now, I'm not absolving him of this because he has done all of the buildup up to this point, and he ends up giving in. But he basically, I don't know if he's trying to kind of ignore McVeigh, but he basically is telling McVeigh, like, in no, simple terms, but I think he's telling him he's out. McVeigh ends up calling him back and basically just lays into him and I think threatens his family. I'm not sure if it was mixed words or anything like that, but from what Nichols says, McVeigh alludes to the fact that no one will get in his way. If he doesn't help him, he's a coward, and that he'll pay the price, or his family will pay the price for it. So at this point, Nichols is like, okay, I guess this guy's a fucking psychopath. He'll pretty much do whatever he needs to get this thing pulled off. And instead of just taking his family, knowing McVeigh has all of this stuff, the fact that you don't think that if McVeigh gets caught, that you don't think McVeigh's going to get caught, but if he does, that you're not going to be tied to this somehow.
Yeah.
Is ridiculous in itself if you have that actual thought process. At this point, not saying to yourself, I'm grabbing my kids, putting my kids and my wife in the car, I'm driving to the police station, and I'm telling them where McVeigh is, I'm telling them where all the stuff is. McVeigh is going to go away for conspiracy to commit terrorism, and he's going to go away for 10 to 15 years. I'm going to turn witness on him. I'm going to make sure they have everything they need to lock him up, and then just like what happens later in his life, I'm going to get put into witness protection, I'm going to get a new life, and I'm going to be sent somewhere else.
Not Terry.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I feel like it's a touch of revisionist history all the way around.
Yeah.
I think that Terry was in this whole hog until he got scared and decided not to do it. I don't think that this was a situation where he was threatened by McVeigh too much. I think McVeigh knew exactly what he needed to do, and as far as having Terry there, it didn't really matter either way.
He just needed someone there technically because at this point, once they're done doing all of this mixing and getting this thing ready to actually go, Terry's job is done. Like
Yeah.
you said, I think you said useful idiot when you
Yeah.
were talking about Terry previously. He just basically needs someone to make sure that this timetable is actually going to be met.
I think to try and make sure that Terry didn't go to prison for the rest of his life, he had to try to make the defense that that McVeigh was bullying him into doing this. Like he was threatening his family, and somehow that gets
And then
you
the only person that's
25
going to be
years.
able to counter that would be McVeigh, who's a fucking domestic terrorist at that point.
Yep.
And what's his word going to mean?
Well, and I mean, at that point, he doesn't care. He doesn't care what happens
Yeah.
to Terry. There's also a certain element, too, that I think is kind of an unintended consequence. If Terry were to turn state's evidence, and it plays into a factor with Michael, but if Terry were to turn state's evidence on Timothy McVeigh and the rest of the white nationalist groups find out that he was the one that turned in and flipped on McVeigh,
You're saying if that part of the conspiracy is true, being tied into it?
yeah,
Okay.
his days are numbered. If
That's also true.
if he's the one that turns McVeigh in, and
I
they
still
were,
don't think there's a reason for it, but I can see your point.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's some theory either way. I still don't think that this happened, but it definitely could have.
Well, while they're also out there, so he tells him, he's like, open it back up. We're going to mix this stuff. We're getting it together. And he's like, well, what if they see us? He's like, we're, near a military, there's a military base somewhere around here, which is even stupider that you're doing this shit. But he's like, I'll just, they're used to seeing soldiers move in and out all the time. I'll just tell them that I needed to pull off the road. I'd been driving a long time. He's like, well, what if they pry and they start asking questions? He's like, then we'll take care of it. He's like, what do you mean you'll take care of it? He's like, I'll take care of it. He's like, there's a kid. He's like, fine, we'll lock the kid in the trunk, and then by the time anyone finds him, we'll already have done this thing.
Bomb already go boom.
Yeah. So at that point too, even if Terry had any inkling of trying to get out, he's already done too much at this point. And then, if anything, that would just solidify the fact that if Terry were to try to turn and walk away, he'd probably end up getting shot.
Yeah.
They end up, completing the bomb, and they have to, because it's a box truck, it's not like one of those trucks where the cab is actually connected to the back or has access to it. So he's going to be in the cab when he has to. This thing's got a fuse. It actually has, it's not like, this isn't a detonator or anything like that. This isn't, I'm putting in this specific time. This is, I'm stringing a fuse. This fuse should take 5 minutes. And then I think he has another fuse that should take a backup that should take 2 minutes, right? So they have to drill essentially holes in the box truck to wrap the fuse around the side and then into the cab where he can light it from the cab. They have to paint it yellow so it can't be detected, or put it somewhere where it can't be easily ripped off. So they have 13 of these 500-pound barrels. They string the fuse into the cab, and the morning of the 19th, Timothy McVeigh takes this truck and drives it toward the Murrah building. His plan is to try to get it into the parking garage, correct?
Yep.
And he ends up getting into a loading zone and finding out that he's not able to get in the parking garage. Now,
Truck too tall.
truck too tall. Now, also being the genius that he is, a few blocks back from the Murrah building, he's like, oh, I should be at the Murrah building. I can probably see it down the street. He's like, great, I'll light the fuse. He lights the 5-minute fuse.
The most insane thing about this whole
As he stopped at a red light.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Fuses burn, and as it starts to fill the truck with smoke, he has to crack the window to make sure this smoke can escape. You're sitting in traffic, and you all of a sudden start noticing a little plume of smoke coming out of truck. At that point, Oklahoma City traffic, they're probably just thinking somebody's car sucks or the engine is overheating or something like that. But he's sitting there with smoke in the cabin, and this light ain't turning green. So he, finally it does. He gets it a little closer. Because the truck won't fit is probably a relief to him, because if he had to drive it all the way into the parking garage, we might be talking about it would still be the same story, but there might be a different end to it.
Excuse me, this whole entire time though, he is okay knowing that he could be blown up in this situation.
Well, not only that, I think part of him expected that if the fuses didn't work, he had it set up to where there was a fuel canister or something close enough to him, and he had his gun on him, that if the fuses didn't work, then he would simply be able to just shoot one of the caps or the tank or one of the barrels, and it would ignite, and that would be what set the bomb off. He wanted to survive this, but it wasn't necessary for him.
No.
The act itself was the most important thing to happen, not getting away with it.
What kind of cartoon like scared are you if you're sitting in a truck and you light the fuse and you know you have 5 minutes and then you hit a red light? Is that not the longest red light that you will ever have in your entire life?
I kept thinking too, like, what if there was a traffic accident just somehow in front of him, like
Yep.
a car ran the red light and ended up like crashing into the car in front of him and it blocked, and all of a sudden the cops show up, they start seeing smoke. Like, there are things that kismet or something that should have happened to prevent this, but it didn't. So he ends up pulling up to the drop-off zone around 9 a.m. and the building is a 9-story building, I believe, but when
Yep.
you look at it, the way it's designed and the way the windows are, it almost looks like it's 4 or 5 stories, just because each of the windows look like they're all together, but it's 2 stories each one. It's a fairly large building.
Yeah.
So he ends up pulling on the loading zone, kind of, I guess if you're looking at the building in the terms of a clock, front of the building, but almost toward like the front left corner, I think is where the truck ends up being parked. He ends up lighting at some point the 2-minute fuse to make sure that one, if the 5-minute fails, then the backup goes off, and then gets out, locks it, starts walking away, and at some point walking toward the getaway car, he ends up taking the keys and tossing them off to the side, and kind of like that, I imagine it like that fucking scene on The Dark Knight where the Joker's walking away from the hospital. As he's walking away, he hasn't heard it. He gets a few blocks away and realizes it hasn't gone off yet, and he goes to turn to walk back toward it because he realizes maybe I'm going to have to go in and shoot this thing. And all of a sudden, here's this fucking explosion just tear through the fucking air. And at 9:02, that's when the Ryder truck exploded in front of the building itself.
As Chris said earlier, before that, it released a 4,800 pound or 2,200 kilo payload, which in terms of dynamite, it was... Ooh, I shouldn't have brought that up because I forgot that number.
I'll look it up.
Okay. Just this massive, massive blast. And in that blast, 168 people were killed with hundreds more that were injured. Destroyed a third of the building. It blew a 30-foot or 9-meter wide hole.
30 feet wide.
Yep.
8 feet deep.
8 feet deep. Just this crater in the street. It was such a powerful blast that it damaged 324 buildings in a 4-block radius. The blast could be heard and felt from 55 miles or 89 kilometers away. The estimated damage cost was $652 million. The biggest thing that happened, I'm not short selling just the graveness of this event, but on the second floor of the Murrah building was a daycare. And within this daycare, there were children of people that worked in the building there, people that worked in the surrounding buildings. It was a pretty important thing for kind of the business area, or the businesses in that area. 15 of the children were killed. Thankfully, not all of them. Some of them did survive. They're thriving. They are working within the kind of Oklahoma City bombing framework to raise money and to make a difference.
14,000 pounds of dynamite. Akin to 14,000 pounds.
That's so much dynamite,
I
dude.
know.
It's absolutely incredible how much dynamite that would be.
The amount of destruction they said that it caused, not just for that building, and if anyone has seen images of the building, it basically looks like someone just took a cake and just sliced it in half, and you get to see all of the layers inside of the cake. The entire front half of the building is completely blown off, and you can just see all of the floors inside. You can see desks and fucking office equipment and all that kind of stuff. And like Adam said, in addition to having these government agencies fucking McVeigh apparently didn't do his research. Yeah, he'll miss the ice cream shop, but he won't miss a building with a fucking daycare in it.
No, and his kind of apathy towards that is pretty incredible. And just like Chris said, it was like looking. If you look at a picture of it, it's almost like looking at like a Sims style building where you can see in every room.
What do they call it? Like not a diorama, but when they do a cutaway section of something.
Is that a diorama? I think it is, isn't it?
Is it a diorama? Okay.
Maybe.
Cross section.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can see everything, and thankfully, it wasn't everybody that was in the building. The building held a hell of a lot more people. The shitty thing about this was initially in the plans, McVeigh wanted to blow up a federal building. And I feel like this, if I'm his PR guy, this would have been the move that I would have made. Definitely not blow up the bomb would be plan A. Plan B was he was going to blow it up on a weekend or during the night when nobody was in the building, but he felt that it wouldn't have enough of an impact on the nation, so he decided to do it during a work day.
Yeah, he wanted to get the maximum amount of fucking Death Star workers.
Yeah, just a real terrible, terrible idea, obviously. But the people were able to escape out of the backside of the building. Luckily, it did not take everybody down that was in there. I think there were 750 people in the building at the time. When
you see the picture of the building, it's amazing that many people survived.
Yeah. And I don't know if it was just dumb luck. I don't know if it was the way that the blast came out. It was said that a lot of the injuries that came from the event were when the bomb blew up and it blew the windows out. There were just glass shards flying everywhere.
A huge percentage, like, of the injuries were like glass related, and then quite a few of the deaths were just from lacerations and piercing through with glass. It damaged some like 300 other buildings in the area. Just
324.
And I think when they, and that's varying levels. That could be piece of rock getting launched and breaking a window on another building. But still, the fact that it reached that many other buildings in the surrounding Oklahoma City area is kind of gives you an idea of how large it was. Not only that, but how far away did they find the axle?
3 blocks.
3 blocks away, they found the rear axle of the truck, which comes into play here in just a minute.
Yeah.
Getting back to Tim while all this is going on, so he hears it go off. He finds the car somehow still there, and in his rush, gets in the car and takes off heading back for, where was it in Kansas?
Junction City.
Junction City.
Maybe that was where he headed back to. That's where he was before. I don't know if he was headed.
That's where the motel was.
Oh.
He starts heading back for the motel, I think.
And, I mean, to put myself in that situation, I can't really do it, but at that point in time, after a bomb goes off, you're either running to see the explosion and see what happened, or you are running to your car or running to try to get away. So I don't know if he definitely wasn't the only one that was running away from the blast to try to get away. So it wouldn't be super suspicious.
No, if you're somebody that is close enough to the explosion, you're running away from it.
Yeah.
If you're someone that is far enough not to be impacted by the explosion, you're probably running toward it to see what's going on, or emergency workers, things like that. So McVeigh is at this point, he's driving back to wherever he's going, the hotel or whatnot. And as soon as this occurs, I mean, federal agencies are on the hunt. They're trying to figure out what's going on with this. Their first, suspect is going to be international terrorism, because this has similarities with the World Trade Center bombing. It was World Trade Center is not a federal building, but I'm sure there are federal agencies probably within the World Trade Center.
Yeah, I would assume so.
But at the same time, if a government institution is attacked or something like that, because it was just recently essentially a foreign terrorist, that's where kind of everyone's thought process is going. There's a couple people within the Attorney General's office who are, of course, working with this in conjunction with the FBI and any other government agencies. A few of them that are sitting there thinking, okay, it actually doesn't have to just be that. We need to also look into the fact that this could potentially be a homegrown terrorist that carried this out.
The perpetrator might not be brown in this occasion.
So while all of this, essentially this information, this fact-finding is going on, trying to get any type of lead for who's responsible for this, McVeigh ends up passing by a state highway officer, and state highway officer passes him, all of a sudden flips around and pulls McVeigh over.
90 minutes after the explosion. He was only 90 minutes away before he got caught.
Well, he didn't get caught for that.
But before he gets arrested, not for
Exactly.
that.
So through just some type of, idiocy on McVeigh's part, he forgets to put the license plates back on the car. He's in such a rush to get out of there that he's driving essentially with no plates. Cop comes up to him. Actually, McVeigh gets out of the car after he gets pulled over. Cop is like, "Get back in your car. I didn't tell you to get out." He's like, "Just trying to be helpful. Thought I would bring my information to you." Basically trying to do anything he can to try to avoid suspicion on this. He knows that he's got to get the fuck out of here.
But it's like day one weird guy behavior to just jump out of the car and try to go meet the police officer back in his
And this
vehicle.
guy's already on like high alert because of this.
He was actually headed to Oklahoma City.
Yeah, so he's already, and he doesn't have an inkling that this person is in any way, shape, or form related to this bombing. He's just on high alert because of this. So he could have kept just driving, but because this guy was driving without plates, he turns around to pull him over. As he gets back in his car, cop comes up and sees a bulge in the jacket that McVeigh is wearing because he's carrying his pistol. And he's like, okay. He's like, he pulls his gun. He's like, "What is that?" He's like, "I have a concealed carry permit in New York." He's like, This is
Oklahoma City, boy.
Yeah, he's like, was he in Kansas yet or was he in Oklahoma?
He was near Perry, Oklahoma.
Okay, so he's still in Oklahoma. He's like, "That's not a concealed carry permit in Oklahoma." He's like, "You're also driving with no plates on your car." So he ends up arresting him and takes him. I'm not sure exactly where he takes him. Was it probably in Perry or near Perry?
Yeah, so
where he takes him.
There was a point in time during the discussion when the officer told him to pull the gun out of his pocket, and Timmy says, "Sir, my gun's loaded." And the police officer said, "Yeah, mine is too."
Yeah. He's like, "Careful, officer, it's loaded." He's like, "Yeah, mine is."
So, as Chris alluded to, while this whole thing is playing out, while they're trying to figure out kind of who did this, Timmy has been arrested on a no license plate and gun charge in Perry, Oklahoma, 90 minutes away from Oklahoma City. They find out pretty quick, putting out the profile, that this doesn't quite seem like a terrorist plot as far as like an international terrorist. This doesn't really seem like Al Qaeda. The profilers are looking at this like, well, it seems like it could be more directed towards the FBI, the CIA, anybody that could have been involved as far as like recently. I mean, we've had sieges at Waco. There was the Ruby Ridge situation. The fact that it was targeted at just federal institutions, that's a little bit different. And
it seems like it's a retaliation against a specific entity.
You also have the thought of the DEA being in there too. Like, okay, was this some sort of like a drug cartel that was trying to do this?
Yeah, had we just made a bust? Had we just, made a hole in their operation or anything? So they're really exploring all avenues, again, because something like this for domestic terrorism had never really happened. So if something, there has to be a precedent for something for it to kind of like pop into your head as the number one, suspect. So the axle that we were talking about that got blown away like 2 or 3 blocks, they end up finding that, and they find the VIN number for the vehicle on the axle.
Dumb luck.
Yep. They're able to tell that it's from a Ryder truck. They're able to track it back to where the rental place was and go directly to the rental location. And now he gave a different name during the rental, correct?
Yep. You got 2 sketches. They show up at the rental car agency. It was like a mechanic shop or something like that just rented them. They said, "Have you rented out a truck to anyone, one of these Ryder trucks with this VIN number within the last couple days?" The guy looks in his computer or whatever the shit they had back then. I'm sure it was probably a Rolodex or something like that.
Yeah,
He's like,
carbon copies of something.
Yeah. He came in on this day. There was also another gentleman that came in on the same day. Not really sure which one was which. They provide 2 pictures, and the signature on there was for Kling.
Whatever, Kling.
Yeah, Kling. There were theories about this. He was in the military with a guy whose last name was Kling. He also something about Klingons and Star Trek.
I think
and
that's what it
that
was tied to.
goofy
Is he
shit.
liked the Klingons for Star Trek? The Klingons are a warlike race.
Yeah. So they have a picture of or a sketch of John Doe 1 and John Doe 2, and they have this Kling name to go on. Now, since this is in the same Junction City, they figure, well, the best thing that we can do is spread out along the motels and just see if any of the motel managers know of anybody that looks like this sketch that's checked in there.
Anybody that's come through, passed through, or
Yeah.
anything like that. They're at this point they are throwing out lines in any way, shape, or form to find out if they can tie anyone to this and get an actual name.
And as luck would have it, they show up to the Dreamland Motel where your dreams come true. They talk to the woman at the front desk. They show her the sketches. She points to the first one, a skinny white man with a,
Crew cut or whatever.
yeah, that's grown long and essentially looks like he got like a high top fade almost. And she points to him. She goes, "Yep, I know that guy. That's him. He was odd from the start. I actually put him in the room next to the lobby just so I could kind of keep an eye on him. He was pretty shifty."
She also mentioned the fact that so he had shown up with the original car, the yellow Marquis.
Yep.
She had also noted that he had showed up one of the times to the hotel with the Ryder truck.
So she knew that the Ryder truck was in play for him.
Well, she didn't know anything about the Ryder truck being related to the bombing. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure she heard about that. But the simple fact that when I think she had mentioned to him, they're like, well, what was he driving? And she may have said, I think at the beginning, she was like, well, he was driving this vehicle. But then one of the days he had a moving truck or a box truck. And they were like, okay, now the connection. And at this point, they now have the actual name of Timothy McVeigh.
Yeah, she slides over the information card. Boom. Name's actually Timothy McVeigh.
And the address for Terry Nichols' farm in
Yeah.
Michigan.
Bad deal. At this point in time, Terry and his wife were living back in Kansas, not Junction City, but somewhere in Kansas. But the family farm is still the one that's on his ID. As luck would have it, one of the kind of long shot plans that the governing body that was doing the investigation, I don't know if it was CIA or FBI, they decide to go ahead and ask about any of the arrest records in the area of Oklahoma.
They were trying to determine if anybody had accessed Timothy McVeigh's file.
Yes.
Anyway, to check for any type of previous criminal activity or history. And again, these are just kind of shots in the dark of being like, this takes, this isn't going to take us a lot to check, but something could turn up to where we have to try to tie as part of the case. They have the name, they have the fact that there was a Ryder truck. Now they basically have to make sure that they have enough evidence and this thing is airtight enough to put Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma City during the time that this is happening. And so, oh my God, I forgot where I was going with this.
This part blows me away.
So they're trying to find out if at any point he had any run-ins with law enforcement within Oklahoma City or near it. And they just start calling around to these sheriff's offices, and they're like, have you seen or had any types of run-ins or any of your officers with a man named Timothy McVeigh? And one of the sheriff's departments is like, yeah, actually, we just took him down to see the judge for his arraignment. Now, his arraignment on a charge like this, he was expecting to be in and out and back on the road within a matter of hours. Well, funny thing, when you fucking have a domestic terrorism attack in an area that is close by to where you get arrested, there's going to be a lot of resources going to help out with the cleanup, the rescue efforts and everything for this. So his little arraignment time frame keeps getting pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. So it's hours, if not a day later.
2 days.
2 days later than it should be. So as they call around, he's like, yeah, we just took him down to meet the judge for his arraignment. He's like, that's the guy that's suspected in the Oklahoma City bombing. Go get him. The guy on the phone is fucking on it and just takes off running to try to get to the courtroom and end up snagging him during his arraignment and taking him back to his cell where feds end up showing up and taking it from there.
Weird Timmy, lest we talk about how he was arrested, the mugshot that he has that's most widely known on the internet has to be the one where he's arrested in Perry, Oklahoma. When he's arrested, he is wearing a T-shirt that on the front of it has a picture of Abe Lincoln, and it says "Sic Semper Tyrannis," which is what John Wilkes Booth from our John Wilkes Booth episode screamed out as he jumped from the balcony.
Death to tyrants, death to all tyrants.
After shooting Lincoln.
Which, so that's very weird to have the picture of Lincoln on it. And because that's not who said it, so I get the connection and everything like that. So is he saying that like Lincoln deserved to get shot?
Lincoln was the tyrant. He was definitely on the South Side for the Civil War. There's no way that he didn't harbor a little bit of hate about slavery.
Stupid thought.
There was some other stuff on the back. It was a Thomas Jefferson quote about how the tree of government or some shit like that has to be bathed in the blood of tyrants.
You have to water the tree of freedom with the blood of pages.
Some goofy shit like that. He was also found with a manila envelope that, of course, had pages ripped out of a Turner diary. There was a copy of like the Declaration of Independence that had like protect this with your life or something like that. Just a bunch of very odd, mentally unstable things that were in a packet, which I'm sure he had packed in there as like almost like a
manifesto.
Yeah, something along those lines. So he's found with these things in the car. They actually had gotten a hold of the arresting officer to ask him questions about McVeigh, and he just absolutely filled in all of the gaps and details that they needed about the gun, about the folder that he had, or the envelope that they had found.
Where he was coming from.
Exactly.
They did, like, where he was coming from was the direct route from Oklahoma City, like, back to Junction City.
Well.
It was the most direct route, so they could tell where he was coming from as well.
So they had all of this reason to get him. As Chris said, they end up locking him down. That was on April 21st, so nothing big happened on the holiday. That was just Timmy sitting in jail on 420. That same day, Nichols finds out that they are raiding the family farm in Kansas and that...
Or Michigan.
Or in Michigan, yeah. And that McVeigh had completed his bombing and completed his mission. He figured that the feds were coming for them. He freaks out, tells his wife, "We got to get going." She's like, "No, let's turn ourselves into the authorities." And he immediately replies back with, "Well, that's what happened to the Weavers at Ruby Ridge. If the feds show up, we're definitely all getting shot and killed." She ends up convincing him, because he has some trust of local authorities, that if he goes and turns himself in there, that they will then protect him from the feds that were just going to come shoot him without asking questions.
Do you think the wife was like, I'm trying to imagine what her reaction is, and I'm not going to do it in a Filipino accent. But, you know, you look at Lori Fortier and you're like, oh yeah, definitely completely aware of the situation. How much of this situation is Mrs. Nichols aware of when he's like, hey, remember that thing we just saw on TV, that horrible thing with, you know, the dead people and the dead children and all that kind of stuff? Yeah, I may have had a part in that, so we need to pack up the shit and try to get out because the feds are already at the farm up in Michigan. And she's like, what the fuck are you into? No.
Let's rewind.
Yeah.
Start at the beginning.
What do you mean you had something to do with the explosion? But yeah, ends up turning himself into the local authorities. And then it doesn't take long for Michael and Lori Fortier to be arrested. And as soon as they're arrested, because aside from Nichols, they basically had a layout of the entire plan. It was like, even though he declined to be in it, Michael declined to be in it, for some reason, McVeigh just kept going over there and is like, I want a game plan with you guys. Like, let me tell you what I'm going to do. And maybe I can, like you were saying, maybe I can impress you so much with how cool this plan is that you guys will have no choice but to jump on board.
I don't know what the thought process was. And also at the same time, the fact that once Michael and Lori hear the plan 3 times, why haven't they gone to the police and been like, hey.
Well, eventually when they do, you know, when they're arrested, the deal is Michael's going to go ahead and Lori are going to turn over state's evidence in return for Lori to have immunity, and then Michael having a reduced sentence.
Yeah, Michael served 12 years and was immediately put into the witness protection program because he has not shown up anywhere, which I totally understand because, again, just like Nichols would have been in trouble if he had turned McVeigh in first. There's a good chance that the white nationalist groups probably are going to have it out for Michael.
Do you think that it was more of that fear like it was with Terry Nichols? Or do you think it was more to the fact that this was such a fucking heinous act that had people found out? Because obviously Michael and Lori, their names are connected with this. We know about it now. Their names were connected with it back when this first happened. 12 years later, he gets out. Regardless of where they move, they'll move into an area. Hi, I'm Michael. This is my wife, Lori. We're the Four Tiers. Someone might not have an immediate recognition of that, but after a while, they're going to get found out. And when they find out the people that contributed essentially or were accomplices to this act, I think it had to have been not so much for their protection against any type of white nationalist reprisal. I think it was just about reprisal in general, because something this bad, one of the people that lost family members during that, I could definitely see them getting hunted down.
Yeah, it'd be revenge from both sides, I think. And I didn't really think about it just because until I first really heard about this, and I even forgot that Michael and Lori were a part of this until we started researching it again.
Yeah.
But 12 years was probably still new enough that once he got out, everybody still would have known him. We didn't know him now, but this was so many years ago. That
and Terry Nichols, the name kind of sounded familiar when we first started doing research, but again, the name it's McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh is who you, and Terry Nichols, despite having such a huge part in this, does this happen without Nichols? I think it still does.
Yeah.
But maybe not in the way that it went down.
A smaller form.
Maybe not even a smaller form, but I think there's more of a chance for it to be bungled.
True. And I think he wasn't the driver of the plan, but like we said earlier, he was kind of the useful idiot. He was just good enough to help Timmy rob some people and to kind of get the ball rolling and to put Timmy on a way. Somebody had to drive him to drop off the...
That's what I was saying. to drop
car.
Off the car, to help him acquire the fertilizer, to, once they got the rental car, to, or to take him to go get the rental car. There would have been other records, because if he wasn't there, is he taking taxis? More records to tie him there?
Then I don't know either one of these gentlemen, but I would assume that McVeigh probably didn't mind having somebody else around to talk to.
Having someone around to make you feel justified in what you're doing.
Yeah.
Someone to be like, because I don't know how much Terry Nichols is like, I don't know if this is such a good idea, Tim.
I don't think at all.
He's probably just like, this is, Tim. Yeah.
This was really brilliant. You're going to change the world. The world's going to look at this very, very differently.
Yeah.
For his part, Terry was federally sentenced to 2 life terms in prison for conspiring to build a weapon of mass destruction, 8 counts of involuntary manslaughter, obviously because he wasn't there, but he was a part of the process of the federal officers. This is different from when we get to McVeigh. He was actually tried through the state of Oklahoma. He was spared the death penalty because they had found him guilty, but they couldn't decide unanimously on the death penalty. I don't really know where I fall on that, just because I don't know. You could probably sway me either way. If they wanted to kill him, I probably wouldn't have put up too much of a fuss about it. But he ends up getting charged with ends up getting sentenced to 161 consecutive life terms without parole. Which, again, I mean, it's a tremendous number that you can't really fathom, and I think that they stack it up that way just for the mental aspect of knowing that you could live 161 lives and you still wouldn't get out of prison. Like, that's a pretty defeating thought. He's currently alive, unfortunately, in ADX Florence, which is the, what do they call it?
The Supermax?
Yeah, the... Alcatraz of the Rockies.
Oh, okay.
Because it's in Colorado. He's sharing a living space currently across from some cells with the likes of Chapo Guzman, the formerly alive Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, and that dickhead that bombed the Olympics, Eric Rudolph. So he's in some famous company. I've tossed around the idea when we get into the prison system, just because this place is so fascinating as to who ADX Florence holds, that it's almost like a history book of crime inside the country.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating to know just who's been there.
The prison log is a flip book of the most fucked up stuff to happen.
Oh, absolutely. And that would be a tough episode to get through, I think. Timothy McVeigh. This is quite the court case. Timmy's lawyers meet up with him, trying to decide how to defend the indefensible.
How do you get a defense lawyer for this?
Oh, these were state defense attorneys. These were paid. Nobody took this case on. These were public defenders.
I know, but what do you do? Like what?
Oh, what bad shit do you do to get?
I am not well versed in the legal system. If anybody listening to this is a lawyer or public defender or anything like that, first of all, good for you. Second of all, why are you listening to this podcast? But
third of all, there needs to be 10 times as many of you.
Yes, and if you could please explain to us how a situation like this, what's the expectation of a public defender when something is indefensible? What's your angle, or what are you trying to go for? Because McVeigh is basically telling them, I don't want to go with any of the defenses that you guys are coming up with. My defense is going to be that the United States government was out to kill me, and that my attack was justified in a weird backward form of self-defense, or like a first strike or something, to try to protect myself.
I mean, defense attorneys have to put on the best case that they can, because you have to make the conscious decision, which should never be a decision in the legal system. You have to give everybody the exact same equal defense as possible. You have to defend somebody to the point of where there can't ever be an appeal on ineffective counsel. And we see shit now that we've had some court cases recently that have just absolutely blown my mind. The Moscow murder guy, Brian Kohlberger, his defense attorneys pitched that there was an old archaic law somewhere in the Idaho Constitution from like the 1800s that stated that any grand jury that was ever convened needed to unanimously decide that there was enough evidence to go forward with the case, which isn't true. It's just a majority. So that's their defense, to say that he was unconstitutionally charged and that all the charges need to be thrown out. The guy that committed the Delphi murders, the 2 little girls in Delphi, Indiana, I want to say, his public defenders have pitched the idea that he was being blackmailed by a Norse cult, a Norse murder cult that committed these crimes and killed
Like in the
these
name
2
of
girls.
Odin type Norse?
Yes, in the name of Odin. And that he was told by this Norse cult that he would be killed and that his family would be killed if he didn't take the rap for these 2 girls. You have to come up with literally any fucking defense.
No, I get that, but what I'm saying, okay, so in this situation, you have a state-provided defense attorney.
Yeah.
You then have the state prosecution. You guys work together to some degree. I'm not sure I'm sure if
Very
you're on
little. Just making deals.
Correct, but if you're on the defense side, you got to be wanting to get the fuck out of there and get over to the prosecution side. So I don't know if that comes into play about wanting to defend the indefense. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around this, but when you have someone that is very clearly guilty, beyond a shadow of a doubt in this situation, what if you're the public defender that by some you find a loophole to get this guy out when you know he's guilty, and you end up getting him off knowing that he's guilty, and then he's walking, like, how do you balance the duty of the the oath you take when you practice law, or the regulations that you have, versus your moral obligation to do the right thing?
defense attorneys have one of the hardest jobs that I can think of, because at the end of the day, you have to look at any situation like you just did your job. You could know that that guy's guilty as could be, but every single time he walks in to have a meeting with you, you have to keep the air of innocence in that room, and you have to figure out a way to do it. And for some reason, McVeigh pitches this idea that he was in imminent danger of the government overthrowing him and the people because of the acts that happened at Ruby Ridge and Waco. And he argued to them that imminent didn't mean immediate. It just meant at some point in the future it was going to happen.
And then the argument back from his public defendant was like, exactly. You can't have a reprisal against something that's imminent. There could be a meteor out past Pluto that's on a collision course with Earth. That's an imminent danger. Mm-hmm. That's not the meteor going past our moon. That's an immediate danger.
This isn't some fictitious plan that had never come to pass.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, you're not in imminent danger because they haven't done it yet.
He's like, listen, I'm going to say it in space terms since you like to keep quoting Star Wars and Star Trek and shit. There's an asteroid.
Well, and along that line, his defense attorneys were like, no, we're not. I'm sorry, man. We have to try to win you this case, and that's an unwinnable defense that you're going to put up. So they end up putting up their defense. Just a tremendously sad version of all of these witnesses that were inside the building have to come up and testify just as to what happened and just relive the worst day of their lives over and over and over again.
Like, that's the other thing, too, man. Like, I agree with you that this has got to be one of the hardest jobs to try to do this, adhering to the rule of the law that you've dedicated your life to try to follow. You're up there trying to get witnesses on the stand to provide doubt to their stories or to mix up their information when these are people that were in this or lost children are you up there just as the defense attorney and you're getting ready to ask a question and you just look at him and you're just like, I'm sorry. Like I gotta ask. Like, that to me is the ultimate confliction.
Yeah, and that's where you have to pivot and try to get away from that. Try to not be the person that is fighting with somebody on the stand that lived through that. Say, this is terrible, it's awful, I'm so sorry that this happened to you, I'm not going to hit you with any questions on cross. But when it comes time for the defense to show up, you have to almost ignore that happened and try to bring up any sort of witness that you can use in your defense to say, well, this wasn't really Terry. This was something that happened that could have been anybody. There could have been a second person involved. This is brought up during the case. This John Doe number 2.
Yeah.
And
yeah, because Terry didn't fit the description or something of the second guy that they did the sketch for or something like that.
Yeah, and you have to steer away kind of from having Timothy be the man that's on trial. You have to figure out a way to try to pull that away because those victim statements are never going to do you any good. You're never going to beat that. So he ends up being convicted, and I want to say it was like 4 days before. It took him 20 hours.
Yeah, it was a long deliberation.
Pretty quick. Like 4 days
19
before
hours
sentencing.
They just sat in there. They decided within the first hour, and then they just were like, it's probably going to look really, really bad if we come out after the first hour. What do you guys say we maybe just wait a day?
Catch breakfast, catch lunch, see a double feature. We'll come back for dinner next day.
We'll wheel in
show
a
up.
TV. Everyone like Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore, whatever.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
That was back when those movies were new.
Yeah.
But in a sense, I mean, it was quick, but it seems still like it was too long just with the mountain of evidence that was on this.
It's so weird that there's only 11 counts of murder and conspiracy that he gets convicted and sentenced to death for. And I know that because those carry enough of a sentence that it covers all the bases. But at the same time, like you're saying, you're giving someone 161 consecutive life terms. Charge him for every life that was lost. You should be charged for 168 counts of murder.
Well, and that goes along the lines of this was his federal trial. So he could only be counted to 11 federal murders that took place. And since they ended up not getting the death penalty on Terry, that was when Oklahoma went and charged for all the state residents that he had killed. Mm-hmm. But since McVeigh ends up getting sentenced to death, they felt that it would just be a waste of money
that was the other thing too. McVeigh wasn't tried in Oklahoma, right? Because with this type of situation, they knew that they were not able to get an unbiased jury. Where did they end up trying him?
Colorado.
Colorado, that's right.
Yeah, the judge just decided that there was no way. And there was no way. I mean, he probably could have gotten a fair trial on Mars, but at the same time, he didn't need a fair trial because there was no other side to this story that was ever going to come out.
Yep.
4 days before he ends up getting sentenced to death, his attorneys try to get themselves kicked off the case. They request that the judge remove them from McVeigh's defense because he's just become the most bullshit asshole to work with. He's just not listening to them at all. He's saying that they gave the wrong defense, that his defense would have won. It just completely out of his mind. So they end up trying to get removed. The judge is like, nah, we got 4 days, man. You're riding this out.
Sorry,
You're
guys.
not. Yeah, just sit through this one. It's going to sting. Tell the guy that leads the public defender's office to give you guys a couple cupcakes on the tail end of this.
Give you the week off after this.
Yeah. But he was sentenced to be executed, and it took them a while up until June 11th, 2001, which comes close to a scary, eerie date that we'll talk about here in a second. A month before he was actually supposed to be injected lethally, they found out that the government had failed to turn over like 900 pages of some of their findings and discovery. I believe, I'm not a legal analyst here, but it would amount to what would be called a Brady violation, which would be the prosecution not turning over all of their evidence to the defense, because that doesn't make it a fair trial if they have some shit that the defense doesn't know
Regardless
about.
if they used it or not, if it's defense that could exonerate the...
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. The judge actually looked over all the paper, was like, there's nothing in here that would exonerate McVeigh of this crime. Doesn't matter. Execution back on. So June 11th, 2001, he was executed via lethal injection at the Terre Haute Correctional Facility in Indiana. It was a federal facility.
Larry Bird.
Yep. The execution was transmitted on a closed-circuit TV so victims of the families could enjoy the proceedings. We got a little bit more to get to. What time are we at?
We're good.
Okay. There's a little something about this where they always say, that a death sentence is justice served. I don't think in any situation like this justice could ever be served because nothing's ever going to bring anybody back.
Yeah.
I'm not the hugest proponent of the death penalty just because I think it's a worse punishment to have to live every single day with all of your...
I share the same opinion.
And so as far as the death penalty goes, I don't really believe in it. But there's certain instances like this where we just need to delete somebody from the planet and try to move on and go on without them. And Timothy McVeigh did something that was so awful that we just needed to hit the reset button and live the rest of our lives without Timothy McVeigh on the earth. I'm sure, unfortunately, for a select few, there are some more Timothy McVeighs that live among us, as far as in name, that have to carry that cross. And I would probably change my name if I was born Timothy McVeigh.
Yeah.
But this is one of those situations where it kind of had to happen. And I don't imagine you would get any solace being a victim family member that watched this happen. Because, again, seeing him die doesn't bring your person back or sort of help you feel good beyond the fact of knowing that guy doesn't get to breathe anymore. Again, that's about as much as you can hold. I commend the people that did watch it just for a little bit of closure because I think psychologically that would be pretty important to know that the guy that did that to your loved ones is now gone too.
Yeah, and to have no doubt about it.
Yeah, but just to know that you had to sit through that would be torture, but at the same time, it's like necessary torture to have to be able to understand what's going on there.
To close that chapter.
Yeah. We'll save the niceness for the end. Some of the conspiracy theories get pretty wild. We've kind of alluded to some of them as far as the government being involved to cover up Bill Clinton's blowjob. White nationalist parties funding these ventures to make it happen. Not really a lot there. Timothy McVeigh, like we said, talked a lot about making a difference and doing something. But I think he was probably smart enough and knew just through Ruby Ridge and Waco that there were government agents that had infiltrated these places. So there's a pretty good chance he wasn't telling everybody his plan to begin with.
Still telling too many people.
Yeah, he still did for sure. But it's more of like he was going to generally commit something.
Yeah.
I don't think there was any real big plan there. Do I think those people celebrated what he did? Oh, without a doubt. They loved it. But at the same time, I don't think they were in on it. The most interesting thing, I think we have to run back to Terry Nichols, because Terry Nichols spent these trips to the Philippines doing, I'm sure, a lot of touristy stuff. I'm sure that he saw the sights. I love the Philippines. I have met many Filipino people. I enjoy them. The jokes about the Filipino wife are strictly on the white person side, not on their side. But as we had alluded to earlier, Ramzi Youssef, the architect of the First World Trade Center bombing, was not taken into custody. So as he was on the run, there were people in the government that were trying to find him, that were keeping an eye on him.
Interpol, things like that.
Yeah. They were bouncing. Federal agencies all across the world were bouncing signals back and forth and talking about this. There's actually records of Ramzi Youssef being in the Philippines.
Yep.
Around the same time that Terry Nichols had taken a trip to the Philippines. And there's some talk that maybe that was where the design that was so similar to the World Trade Center bomb was used to...
Suggestion of the Ryder truck.
Yes.
There's just enough.
The fuses were the same?
Yep. There's just enough stuff there to make that connection. Now, is it likely that happened?
Zero.
Probably not. To think of a situation in which a white former United States Army soldier is somehow meeting and getting connected with a Al-Qaeda, terrorist that's on the run, and then somehow swapping information is highly unlikely. But at the same time, there's enough similarities there with what happened. And again, it could have been similarities just for Timothy McVeigh to try to emulate something that he saw worked or tried to work. But there's just enough tidbits in there that have pretty solid connection points and similarities that it makes it an interesting theory.
Yeah, I hate to use the word fun, but it kind of lets your mind travel a little bit to think, are these two bad people connected? When in all reality, if there's a white person in the Philippines over there with an American accent asking if there's any Al-Qaeda terrorists in the Philippines, they will wipe that guy out before he even sniffs Ramsey.
Yeah, is the reason that also has some type of, it's not credibility, but that this conspiracy is not even accepted, but has as much traction as it does, is it because it allows some type of out that this wasn't fully domestic terrorism. This was somebody that was co-opted by Al-Qaeda and turned essentially into like a sleeper cell or some shit like that. So then we can say, no, see, we don't fully raise domestic terrorists here in the United States. We don't have that problem because this was essentially something that was masterminded by this other guy.
Never even crossed my mind until you just said it. That's pretty accurate, I would say.
Yeah.
It sort of pushes the culpability off onto this foreign terrorism again.
As much as it possibly can.
Yeah. Okay. I get you there. But again, this theory just kind of falls on its face because it would just be too hard to make the connections. John Doe number 2. John Doe number 2 has been brought up in the trial.
It's like the second shooter on the grassy knoll type stuff.
Exactly. It got traction in the papers. So much so that there was a Jordanian national that was traveling back home that same day, that was pulled off of a plane and questioned for a number of hours, just grasping at straws because the other picture looked like it could have been someone that was more of like a darker color.
Yeah.
There was something in the picture that was drawn that he was wearing like a Carolina Panthers hat. And to this day, it's still never been known. As far as I know, and from all the research that I did, there were rumblings that there was a a second John Doe that was spotted walking away from the truck with him. It's not on any sort of video camera.
Yeah.
I think that the closest thing that they have was there was a great chance that one of the people at the rider rental facility had gotten a few days mixed up and some people mixed up as far as who was in there, because
Yeah.
Junction City, Kansas, I don't think you're getting somebody coming in and renting a rider truck every single day.
No, and what are you doing? You're looking outside and you see someone else look like they get in, and it could have not been said. It could have been Terry Nichols that he saw from a distance that what he was taking to drop off somewhere, some shit like that.
Yeah, and unfortunately, eyewitness accounts aren't as accurate as we always talk about them being, because the mind is fallible. I mean, I have deja vu on a constant basis, but it's because I do a lot of the same things in my job on a daily basis that sometimes they run together.
Well, it's like when someone asks you, was there anyone else with him? And then you're thinking in your head, and you're like, was there somebody else with him? Did I remember? Yeah, there must have been somebody else, because one man couldn't pull this off. Well, it wasn't one man. It was a couple guys, and there was also a little bit of a support structure behind it.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is kind of what you were talking about, trying to satiate the fact that it's tough to accept that it was just kind of one man that perpetrated this act.
Like, it's that easy for one man to do this. Like, you want to try to make it seem like it takes more than one person, that the likelihood of two people wanting to do this, it's a comfort thing that maybe people want to say, like, yeah, one person alone can do this, so we're not in that much danger for this happening again.
Yeah, something along those lines. So that's kind of most of the conspiracy around it. There's some other kind of wingnut things that keep coming out, but when you look at it all in total, there's enough morsels and a couple things that kind of make them interesting and fun. The rest of them are just out in left field. As far as today goes, and I guess in the past, after the bombing happened, the Oklahoma City National Memorial was dedicated April 19th, 2000, which was 5 years after the bombing. In this memorial, it's so damn cool just seeing a picture of it. There's 168 empty handcrafted bronze and glass chairs with each victim's name etched on them. And it's set up on the grounds of where the Murrah building was. And they actually placed them in the spots where the bodies were found. So they're not like perfectly lined up. They're
that's great. Okay.
in the actual spots. At night, it's lit up. You can go in and check everything out. It's just a very cool area.
Probably a very somber place.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It would be something that I would love to go see and just know that, like, crying's just going to happen.
Yeah.
Just the empathy of knowing everything that happened that day was just so bad. And those people didn't know. One of the reasons that he chose that was because McVeigh said that he wanted to hit the United States in its heartland.
Yeah.
I mean, Oklahoma City isn't on a top 10 list.
That's why it's so weird to hear it's the Oklahoma City bombing. You're just like, why did this happen there?
Well, just like you're talking about, it's something that you wonder, but you also wonder because I don't know if it got, and we talked about this before when we were researching, I don't know if it ever got the credit that it deserved, because only 6 years later, I mean, only, June 11th. So July, August, September 11th, 2001, 3 months later, after Timothy McVeigh was lethally injected and killed, we have 9/11. We have another bombing that's happening in this country that is a massive, worst terror attack that's ever happened in our country for sure, right? Like, hands down.
I'm trying to remember the comparisons of numbers between Pearl Harbor and that. I want to say that they say it's the worst terror attack since Pearl Harbor, because I want to say the Pearl Harbor actually may have been a little bit more. They're both, I think, within the 2000 range somewhere, but I think Pearl Harbor might be a little higher. I'm not 100% sure on that.
And it just sort of erases some of the memory, I think, of Oklahoma City, because it was the thing that had just happened, and it was something that we never really expect. Well, I think the government kind of expected it. That's going to be an episode that's going to be tough to do, because there's a certain amount of reverence that we are going to have with 9/11 because it is so new. But there's also certain things that kind of make you want to try to make light of it.
And they make you sound crazy when you talk about them, even if a lot of them are common sense type stuff. It still makes you sound crazy.
Yeah. So I think that it's something that happened inside this country that I think most people have on the periphery. But honestly, thinking about it now, just as I'm saying that, 1995, you're 20 years old, almost.
Me?
No, if you're born in 1995, you'd be 19.
Right now?
Yeah.
Oh, no, you'd be...
Am I way off on?
Oh,
I'm way
yeah.
off on that, huh?
Dude, you'd be like 29 years old.
Okay, yeah, that was dumb, but
It never feels like the 90s were that long ago.
Yeah,
That's the
dude.
whole thing.
But that's all the way childhood, adolescence, adulthood. Like you're into it. This was a while ago.
Yeah.
So it just sort of slips away, and it's unfortunate because there's a lot of people that died, and yeah, it was one of the worst tragedies that I think we've researched, which is scary because, well, U.S. tragedies.
Yeah.
There's been plenty more overseas, but it's scary.
Yeah, man. Especially due to the fact that there's so many similarities between kind of the social climate then and a lot of the things that he was in his manifesto and his gripes and all that kind of stuff, and his hatred for certain things is still something we still hear about very prevalently today.
Well, it turns out that 29 years later, guns aren't more regulated than they were back then.
Yeah.
So it's not like...
And there's still that fear they're coming for your guns, and there's still it's still that type of fear mongering that essentially kind of led to this.
Yeah, they've been coming for our guns for a really long time and just haven't been able to do it.
Yep. All right, guys. Well, I was going to say, do you have anything left on this?
No. Thank you for... hopefully we made this as light as possible, just as absurd as this kind of was, because it was a heavy topic. This is, I think, the first time in a long time that Chris and I have done something where we've kind of like halfway through the research looked at each other, but like, this is kind of a bummer, huh?
Yeah.
But we try to, get through this stuff. It's not easy, but there's a lot of history that's not easy, and this is certainly one of them.
Yep. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us. I know this one was a little bit longer, but hopefully you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us for another episode. If you like what you heard, hit that subscribe and like button. Follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, still hit that anyway, because we'll probably cover something in the future that you do like. Please follow us on our social media. Adam, hit them with it.
Our Instagram is historically high pod, historically high pod, and we are on Twitter at historically high. That's historically HI.
All right. And if you guys want to send in any feedback, suggestions, hit us up on those two, or you can even do it on Gmail. It's historicallyhighpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Peace.